ORDEAL Season 3, a season with more hype than the previous, with even more expectations. A season that started spectacularly and in a way we could not have expected it to, and by the end became something that was hardly interesting to read. Covering ORDEAL is the reason my channel exists, and I greatly anticipated the third season's arrival, creating videos discussing what we could see during the season. When the season was announced, it came with a trailer that I also covered, dissecting each image and using them to infer on what the season's contents could be. During the season's run, I did weekly reviews, going over the contents of each episode each week, trying to understand the verse as it continued to expand. With all of that being said, it's only right that I do a full season review, looking at what made the season good and what made the season bad. First, I will go over 4 things I enjoyed about the season, or its pros. Then I will go over 6 things I didn't like about the season, or its cons. While this is a subjective topic, I will try to be as objective as possible with my reasoning through the course of the video, painting a clear picture on why something is good or bad, or why it's enjoyable or distasteful. I am also not the only opinion you will get a chance to hear, as I have asked 2 of my friends and fellow consumers of ORDEAL, Mango and Nauni, to give their opinions on the season as well. Their opinions will be placed in sections of their own, and at the very end of my grand sections. All 3 of our opinions may overlap and repeat, but the purpose of including them is to show that we can come to similar conclusions on subjects in our own ways, as well as having completely different opinions altogether. Before we begin, I want to give a big thanks to everyone who has joined the channel since the start of these Season 3 reviews, and I truly appreciate all the support that allows me to be one of the bigger voices in the community. With that being said, I would like to ask for anyone who isn't subbed to the channel to do so, as that allows you to be more properly updated on any content I put out. Please like, hype, and share the video, as that helps show YouTube and its algorithms that people actually enjoy what they are viewing on my channel. And as always, leave a comment with your own thoughts as well. Now, without further ado, onto the video. The art of ORDEAL is without a doubt the best thing about it. Brent's style is a breath of fresh air when compared to others, and sometimes it feels like watching a series as opposed to reading it. What really adds to this, in my opinion, is when Brent draws characters, items, or effects that break the panel frame. An example would be Masato. The top of his head is drawn in front of the frame instead of being cut off by it. This mixed with the angle he is drawn at gives off a similar feeling to seeing a pop-up book or watching a 3D movie. Another example would be Yuki in her first use of black ice. Her sword breaks the frame, which helps add to the focus on it the panel is meant to portray. The resulting attack breaks the frame as well, which helps add to the size and intensity it's supposed to portray. Brent has been drawing past the frame since Season 1, and since then his skill with it has increased. He not only uses it to add focus or enhance the perspective, but also as a simple way to fill in the space between panels. Like during Shay's fight with Rajani, Zahara goes past the frame border, which makes for a smooth scroll into the next panel. Brent's use of color theory is another aspect as to why the art in the series is so nice to look at. Seth and Azura are probably the best characters drawn this season, and in my opinion it is because the colors Brent uses for them and where he applies them are so vibrant, yet don't interfere or take away from another color related to their design. And this is especially true for Seth, whose hair is a brighter color than his clothes. Yet his entire design feels like pieces that come together properly in a puzzle instead of it feeling like mismatching pieces. Brent's use of color doesn't just apply to characters, but to the environment as well. Looking at Ilios's and Thanatos' mindscapes helps capture what I mean. With Ilios, Brent uses colors that reflect a bright and sunny day, which goes with his character as he is a reflection of the sun's heat and radiance. With Thanatos, Brent uses colors that portray the feelings of disaster, dread, and gloom, which goes with his character as he reflects death. Brent's use of color in both scenes makes them stand out and pop in their own way, and the colors of each environment in this case directly reflects the characters associated with them. Ilios's mindscape also shows the consistency of Brent's use of color regarding scenes, as Ilios's mindscape was introduced in Season 2, yet nothing about it feels different, which is due to the environmental color consistency Brent has. When a scene's environment changes, so do some of the colors related to it. In episode 145, it is night, so the color of the scenes relate to this. But when Shay creates his Tomas, a warm color gradient is added to the following scenes to express the new light source that has been created by Shay. And this is what I mean by environmental color consistency, which is something I have always enjoyed about Brent's art. And there are a few things Brent does in relation to the episode structure that I really enjoyed and would love to see more of. In episode 115, Brent uses a brief flashback showing us a baby Shay held by May. The entire sequence of these panels is triggered by Demaya seeing the current version of Shay, with the sequence ending with said current version of him. This type of flashback does two things. The first is it allows Brent to show a past scene regarding Demaya, Shay, and May without the need to use dialogue in it, as it's very simply understood that Demaya interacted with Shay when he was a baby. The second is that it shows the drastic change in Shay's character, going from an innocent child to a man who has and will face many trials. In episode 135, before he is attacked by Veal, Lewis remembers the words of Leo from when he was 17. We then see part of this from his perspective, with the two panels that are shown. Leo's words then continue while the present events come back into play. I enjoyed this sequence for two reasons. Like with Demaya, it shows the past from the character's visual perspective, as in how they saw the events. But then the context of the events are told using just words, while keeping them in relation to what is happening in the present. This is a format I don't think Brent did in prior seasons, and has lots of potential to be reused again moving forward. At the start of episode 140, we get a scene using a bat and a wolf as a metaphor for Shay and Veal. This is again a scene with no words, which I highly enjoy as it allows the art of the scene to speak for itself. This also allowed Brent to tell the story in a different format, something he hadn't done before, and has great potential to be used again, as quite a few characters have metaphorical animal counterparts. This metaphor also uses the initial space of episode 140 far better than what usually occurs, as it adds to the episode as a whole, instead of it being a typical recap portion, and this would apply to the start of episode 160 and 124 as well, where the initial space is used more interestingly than other times in the series. This is somewhat small, but I highly enjoy it when Brent switches the font and color for certain characters depending on the scene, as it helps make them stand out in whatever way it's supposed to, such as the red for Lewis when he used Death Stance, or the yellowish color used for the Ancient One. Now let's look at instances this season where I feel Brent's artistic skill truly shine through. The heart in episode 150 is probably the best thing drawn this season. It may not be the most accurate drawing of a heart you've ever seen, but when you look at it, the veins, the blood vessels, the color, everything about it looks and feels beyond real. The pool of blood scene in episode 133 feels like something straight out of a movie, but it doesn't just stop there, as in the close-up panel before Veal actually rises out of it, the texture of the blood almost has a Souls game-like visual to it, and somewhat feels alive, as in if anyone were to go into the pool, not only would they drown, but they would be forced down by the blood itself. Sun Through Moon may have the best attack depiction in the series. From the ground we see the immediate devastation it causes. Behind Shay we see the sun itself, the source of his power, and its placement almost suggesting the sun is where the attack is coming from and not Shay. And then we see the wave of flames and heat with part of the area scattered in its visual, adding to the sheer magnitude of the attack. The intensity of this attack is only rivaled by Ordained Judgment, but in my opinion it surpasses its predecessor, and I would truly love to see such an intense depiction for grand attacks of other characters. I'll wrap up this section by saying Brent's art doesn't make Ordeal, it is Ordeal, and the way he uses it has improved the way he can tell the story. From how the colors a character wears helps represent who they are, to how the environment is drawn, helping set the feeling of the scene, or how a character expresses themselves when interacting with others. All these things come together in a beautiful visual array to make the series we all enjoy. The way characters interact with each other may not be one of this season's strong points. However, I do feel this season offers interactions that hold a bit more weight to them than those of the previous seasons. And for this, I'd like to start with Azam. The first time Azam speaks in episode 118, it is for the active encouragement of Yukiko, saying to not underestimate herself and to keep her guard up. Later in the episode, he gives her a rundown of the situation regarding Ephialtes and his chi. And when she is scared of Ephialtes' voice, Azam tells her not to be afraid. At the start of episode 119, Azam gives the rundown of the growing situation, while also seemingly teaching her, as he tells her to change her stance in accordance to Ephialtes' now noted speed. At no point does he ever really discourage her, and simultaneously acts as a warrior and an uncle by letting her know what is occurring while trying to keep her safe. Not everyone is a fan of the dialogue the series has, but I personally enjoy it, and episode 115 may be the best example of why. The series more often than not has a respectful and direct approach to how characters speak, and this is especially clear when Shay speaks to Demaya, with him apologizing for failing to protect Andrea and even calling her mother, which is an intentional sign of respect in Caribbean culture. I especially like the parting metaphor Demaya gives Shay before he speaks to Andrea, as it is a perfect pretense for the next section of the episode. The respectful dialogue the series has is sort of turned on its head when Andrea speaks to Shay, but instead of being directed outward, it is directed inward, as all of what Andrea is yelling about has to do with her own insecurities, and in my my opinion, everything she says to Shay here perfectly captures how someone like her would feel having lost in such a way while carrying a name as heavy as Thomas. The respectful tone then comes back, but now with an even greater caring undertone, as Shay says his vow to Andrea, with him accepting her for all that she is, the good and the bad. These 3 sections of the episode show the series in a somewhat relatable way, by having the characters interact with one another in a way that feels so natural. Keeping Andrea in focus, I think she and Leith have the best exchange of ideals in the entire season. They are almost used as direct representations of the respective sides they fight for, with Leith saying he and the other Titan generals are all outcasts saved by Thanatos' will, who seek the communities that birthed them to be ground to dust, and Andrea trying to point out that Leith is an outcast because of his arm, which is a reflection of the failed control he has over his talent, and that war beginning will see more Kimyos like him, who are thrust into battle being denied the proper opportunity to master their gifts and understand who they are, which is what peace would allow for. Not a lot of conversations exist like this that take an insight into how the sides of the conflict feel about the outcomes they are fighting for, which is why this conversation is far more important than it initially seems, and is such a good use of characters with conflicting ideals interacting. The Ancient One speaking to Shay is probably one of the most contrast-heavy interactions that takes place. I say this because what the Ancient One says to Shay is in direct opposition of his very purpose. He tells Shay that he has fought in their wars for years, and now desires the sleep of death, and then tells Shay to abandon everyone, as none of them know what they fight for anymore. This is very clearly an individual who is tired and projecting his experience onto another, and if Shay listened to him, he would be going against the very reason he was born. Since this interaction involves a character we know we will see with Shay in the future, it truly makes you wonder what Shay does that changes the Ancient One's mind, and no longer sees him projecting how he feels onto Shay, but chooses to directly aid him in his purpose. I also simply like that this interaction sets up the Ancient One as a whole, as it feels far more natural and not forced. The way Shay interacts with Zahara in episode 141 feels somewhat unique in the series. I say this because you could initially see it as Shay trying to recruit her, but that more so takes place in episode 125. But here it's more of Shay telling Zahara what kind of aid she can provide to him, stating that he will grant what she desires, which is war, but also not forcing her to stay by his side, which is the unique aspect of it. And Zahara's silence adds to this, as it genuinely feels like she is trying to hear him out and choose what she wants to do. No character really has such a presence even when they don't speak like she has, and her being given a choice that she answers with her actions instead of her words in episode 155 makes this initial interaction all the more better. The biblical connections of Ordeal help make the series what it is, and help set it apart from others. Brent is no stranger to writing his faith into the series, but season 3 makes that truth even more apparent, and as a Christian myself, I can't help but enjoy the way Brent weaves biblical lessons or concepts into the series. And the season starts out by showing Shay's faith. We first see he has a Bible with him at secure location 27. We are told Shay has diminished faith, right after his brother says that he prayed to be helpful. We then see Shay actively pray, with that prayer being answered in the form of the anointed war state. Whether it was done intentionally or unintentionally, everything about those panels can reflect aspects of a Christian's progress in their faith. The Bible with the notes represents the start of the journey, attempting to understand the word and its wisdom. The conversation with Shay's brother represents building a prayer life and seeking the Lord's aid even more directly. But when nothing is presented to you clearly, your faith begins to wane. Shay praying on top of the train represents discipline, continuing to pray even when you feel you aren't being heard. And the appearance of the anointed war state represents your prayers being fulfilled. For in God's timing will prayers be answered and new things now understood. Shay's overall purpose in the story is supposed to be one that represents what it is like to walk on your individual path. But I think Brent also uses Shay to illustrate aspects of what Christians experience, and what I just explained is one of those instances. And this makes the story all the more better, as it makes Shay more than just a plain protagonist, but a character people can relate to in more ways than one if they actually tried. Keeping Shay in focus, I'd also like to look at something else he and Ilios represent. Ilios tells Shay, as he resides in his body, he guards his heart. And I think this is supposed to be an active portrayal of Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, which reads, "Above all else, guard your heart, for all you do flows from it." The word heart can mean one's innermost character, feelings, or inclinations. So the verse illustrates that what we do comes from our innermost self, and if something were to affect it, that would in turn change how we act. Shay and Ilios embody this concept, as Shay is constantly affected by what what occurs around him. Yet Ilios is always shown trying to make sure what happens around Shay doesn't change who he is down to his core, thus changing how he acts. And a good example of this is in episode 112, where Ilios tells Shay to make decisions that would bring joy to Leo, Mei, Sabito, and Bjorn. But if he continues on the path he perceives him to be on, he will end up similar to Rokash. I like this biblical connection because it properly conceptualizes a simple piece of wisdom and has the potential to apply to other Kimyos with mental living talents. Since we looked at the concept of guarding one's heart, it only feels right to look at another concept related directly to it. I could be wrong about this, but I do feel cursed chi in some way has a connection to sin. And in a Christian-based story, you have to wonder how sin will come into play. And season 3 was the time Brent chose to introduce that with Noragiri and Widow's Night. When Shay grabs Noragiri, Ilios tells him that cursed talents are those which have strayed from the ordinances of their god, which relates to sin by definition, as sin is a vitiated state of human nature in which the self is estranged from God. And this shows that cursed talents are introduced as things that in some way have separated themselves from what God desired for them. Brent then takes the concept of cursed chi and connects it to salvation through Rajani and Widow's Night. Through Rajani, we are shown further evidence that cursed talents take a gradual hold on their user, and that there is a window for the two to be separated. However, Rajani identifies with her talent and while still in control, chooses not to be separated from Widow's Night. She, in a very literal sense, rejects salvation, which is the deliverance from the power and effects of sin, by choosing to remain bonded to her curse. If cursed chi really is an allegory for sin, then just like in real life, it causes you to stumble, which is what Brent shows us when Shay is infected by Widow's Night. It, along with Dothanil's dagger, is the reason Shay falls to his knee, as sin and pain are infecting him. Yet he does not allow this to persist and cuts his own arm off, which in itself relates to Matthew chapter 18 verse 8, which reads, "If your hand or foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire." This verse can also be why the episode is named Awaken a Different Man, as when Shay wakes up, he will be a new person altogether, effectively entering a new life, maimed. Cursed chi relating to sin is probably one of my favorite ways Brent has woven Christianity into Ordeal. It again tackles biblical lessons by showing them directly, yet here it feels more underlying than directly placed in one's face to be understood easily. It is not a hard concept to grasp, but is better understood when you know scripture. The last and most important thing I want to mention is Jesus being shown in episode 145. Whether you like how he did it or not, you have to commend Brent for being bold enough to place who he believes in so directly in his story, when others may not be able to do the same. Brent had actually mentioned he would do this in a past Q&A, but I feel it was partially disregarded as there's no way we could have predicted when Brent would do it. Jesus' appearance in the story was very cool to me, and while people have their issues with how Brent wrote him, the grand lessons he is trying to impart on Shay align greatly with his character, and there are 2 things that I'd like to focus on the most. The first is the question he poses to Shay about if he were to kill Thanatos, would that cause his followers to suddenly turn and serve instead of take? His question to Shay essentially asks if removing a negative source causes people to change their ways instantly, and specifies it to taking and serving because he serves while Thanatos and his forces take. This comes from the fact that a lot of what Jesus has been said to do relates to him serving others, with Mark chapter 10 verse 45 saying, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many," with his servitude showing up as healing the sick and disabled, raising the dead, educating, feeding large crowds, and sacrificing his very life, accepting the burden of everyone's sin upon himself. This servitude of course does not stop at him, but extends to his disciples as well, as he has given them the ability to heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, and drive out demons, as said in Matthew chapter 10 verse 8. This is then reflected in the story, as Jesus himself says he has empowered many to do what is needed to prevent Thanatos and his forces from hurting people. And this wouldn't simply involve fighting Thanatos and his forces, but helping the people whose lives have been disrupted by them. The second lesson is regarding grace, and Shay refraining from granting death. He specifically tells him to refrain at all costs from granting death, as death satisfies his need for justice through the pain of another, but grace is to endure pain so that another might live. This comes from how Christ wants to preserve life, and the aforementioned actions of healing and raising the dead, as well as sacrificing his own life for the sake of others, exemplify this. But so does Matthew chapter 26 verse 52, which reads, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. This verse's context is one of Jesus rejecting violence that could save him from being taken into custody. We can relate this to ordeal even further when you understand that Peter, who Jesus was speaking to in the verse, likely felt the man he had been following should not be taken into custody, and thus wanted to use violence and potential death to satisfy his own need for justice. And this would circle directly back to what Jesus tells Shay. So as you can see, Jesus being present in Ordeal's story to impart a lesson onto Shay perfectly aligns with who he has shown himself to be, and the lessons he imparts match what is written in scripture. And I'll finish this entire section by saying, Ordeal as a story can work without the Christian aspect of it. However, the story is all the more better for having it. Part of Ordeal's very essence comes from the biblical connections the story has, and it is always a joy to see how Brent will weave a biblical lesson or a concept into his work. This season, without a doubt, has expanded the power system in a way I don't think anyone expected it to. There are a lot of concepts introduced throughout the season that greatly extend what we thought was possible, and Brent does it in a way that feels very discreet and less in your face, with some concepts building upon each other, which are both things I enjoy. Let's now look at every new addition to Ordeal's talent and chi-based power system and what it adds to the story as a whole. I think it's best we start with the concept of chi weight, which is exactly how it sounds. Chi weight, by my definition, would be the pressure a Kimyo's chi exudes. The weight of a Kimyo's chi is usually determined by how much chi they actually possess, with the god tier and equivalent Kimyos having chi so massive it creates the sensation of physical weight. However, it is possible the weight of a Kimyo's chi isn't fully linked to how much chi they possess and can come from another source, like that of Lewis, whose chi weight comes from the memories stored within the ashes of his talent. The weight of a Kimyo's chi can then be concealed with chi shrouding, the total masking of a Kimyo's chi, which erases their entire presence, or used to fortify a Kimyo's body with the rock armor technique, a means of hardening the body through a constant application of chi to it. The rock armor technique not only has defensive use, but as pointed out by Wolf Nara aka Code Archives, an offensive use as well, as the fortification of a Kimyo's body adds the weight of their chi to attacks, which we see when Shay initially attacks Leigh, who outright comments on his strike's heaviness, and when Rai is sparring with Amara, being able to push her back while only hitting the practice mitts. The chi shrouding technique can be extended through what I like to call aerial chi shrouding, which is what Ephialtes does in his fight against the Zom. Aerial chi shrouding, by my definition, would be a technique that does not hide the weight of a Kimyo's chi, but extends it away from them and places it over a large area. Outside of chi weight, these techniques are all advanced uses of chi, which shows the skill required to use them, as mastery of them is connected to god tier or Gaki related characters, with the exception of aerial chi shrouding, which is related to Ephialtes, a Titan general tier character, and you could say that is the tier level a Kimyo would need to be at to begin training with the techniques. These techniques also allow a character to be stronger even when not utilizing their talent, whether that be through direct conflict or trickery. With chi weight and its related techniques understood, we should now look at sensing chi and things related to it. The ability to sense chi was semi-established in season 2, initially from Crowder, whose talent makes him undetectable by any of the 6 senses, and in my opinion the ability to detect chi would be the 6th sense, which makes detecting chi a basic aspect of what Kimyos can do. And we see this in episode 147, when one of the soldiers in Verdunduel's company could detect a younger Veal's chi, but also how big it was in comparison to Veal himself, which should mean determining how much chi a Kimyo has is a basic or intermediate skill. Chi detection is then taken further with Bjorn, who can expertly sense things through smell, which was given the name Chi Scent during season 3. The Chi Scent, based on how it's depicted, bolsters the user's sense of smell, allowing them to perceive the unique sense of people as well as detect chi, as if it were an aroma. Both Bjorn and Shay with this method of detection could outright smell Veal, with Bjorn even being able to smell the age in Veal's chi, and Shay being able to smell and track the scent of Lewis's chi. The Chi Scent may also grant unique attributes depending on the user, as Bjorn could tell Tevin was a hide user like himself, and Shay seemed to get a passive warning when Roberto and Ariel tried to claim the life and death boxes, and this could be how he knew to look into Jose before the code meeting. The ability to sense a person's chi is also linked to being able to sense their emotions. Through their connection to the ether, Reed is able to feel faint traces of bitterness and anger in Shay's heart, and Lewis says he can feel the anxiety in Veal's chi. We also see a second note of hostile chi mentioned this season coming from Jose. Anger, anxiety, and hostility are all emotions, and add to the notion that what a person feels is subconsciously imprinted on their chi. Therefore, making what they feel detectable by others. Since I've mentioned Shay's ability to detect chi, I should also note Azam's ability to gauge it as well. Azam throughout his fight with Ephialtes is able to gauge how much chi he used by sensing it and converting it into percentages. And at the start of the fight, this allowed him to gauge the intensity at which Ephialtes would strike with. This also has a secondary effect of tracking how much chi Ephialtes should have remaining through the course of the fight, with Azam even noting that Ephialtes' use of Azam's Bane consumed the majority of the chi he had left. And just for numbers' sake, Ephialtes starts the fight at 100%, then goes to 50% after opening his eye, then to 30% after creating the small nightmares, and finally to about 5% after creating Azam's Bane. Saving this for last, there is one other way chi can go undetected, and that is if it is dormant. Unlike chi shrouding, which is an active technique used by Kimyos, dormant chi, though rare, can naturally occur in Kimyos, talent objects, and living talents. Shay's Thanatos chi was said to be dormant, which is why it goes unnoted in season 1, 2, and his entire life. The Merlin Stone was said to be dormant, and this caused it to be hidden inside Malhazar's grave for a few hundred years. And Konos himself was said to have dormant chi that could only be felt when he is actively copying something, and this caused Kofi to have to guess how much chi he had left during the course of their fight. The added information regarding sensing chi is a beautiful addition, as it gives characters in the story the ability to gauge the strength of their opponent by way of knowing how big their chi is, how much they may have, and their mental stability, and all of these things allow for more accurate strategizing in combat. Now let's look at what this season does in relation to talent weapons and objects. Through the Merlin Stone, we now know that talent objects can be older than the Great Four, as it is said to be older than Thanatos himself, and that it is unknown when it first arrived on Earth. This partially translates to what Laith says about the Elder's Mantle, with him mentioning it being one of the newest at just 27 years old. And this means that talent objects can predate the Great Four or be newly born in the modern era. Zahara's presence in the story adds a few things as well, with the first being talent weapons can have chi on par with the Great Four, as a talent weapon like Ventor, while strong, does not have enough chi to keep itself protected from Ilios' combustion, while the likes of Zahara has zero issue having nearly all of Ilios' chi channeled through her, meaning she does have enough chi to keep herself protected from Ilios' combustion. The second thing she adds is the concept of talent transfer between objects, as she was noted to move herself from weapon to weapon before she stayed in the Naginata. And though we haven't seen it, this should mean that transferring a talent from a person to an object or from one object to another object is possible. Zahara's presence is also our initial introduction to the concept of cursed chi, also known as the verboten. This is also something that seems to be universally accepted as bad within the verse, as Jose is genuinely shocked that Code would allow Andrea to wield something that has cursed chi, and Laith directly calling it treachery. Cursed chi is corruptive in nature. It fuses with and overtakes the chi of a Kimyo, leading to their mind eventually being lost forever, and the newly corrupted talent taking control of their body. A completed curse can also result in physical death instead of mental death, where the body also dies and the talent moves on, and this is learned in relation to Rajani's cursed talent, Widow's Night. Rajani herself also introduces us to the Cyclops seals, cursed ritual seals that hinder and eventually restrict the use of ancient chi. The introduction of such an item does two things. The first is the idea that talent objects have the potential to be crafted, and the second is that specific chi can be targeted. Ilios says they were created and assumes Thanatos found a way to create them again, which means unique talent objects can be formed through an unknown means. The fight that the seals are used in really hammer the point that they can restrict ancient chi, and this means it's possible to hinder or target the unique chi types the series has, which may also include cursed chi and unstable chi, with the latter being something we see with the use of the incubation pods in Patmos, and this concept could be applied to a new talent object like Seal as well. While looking at talent objects, I also want to touch on Rai, as he and Konos add the concept of autonomous living talents to the story, which are talents that do not need to exist in a Kimyo, as they are effectively living sources of chi who can function on their own. Through his talent, Rai becomes like a talent weapon himself, and can use the chi of the person who wields him as ammunition. This adds to the idea that while talent weapons possess their own chi, they can also be fueled by the chi of their Kimyo, which Ilios himself seems to confirm when he mentions Ventor has access to the chi of Shay's body. Season 3 took the time to use talent weapons and objects to add to its story through very specific means, and talent weapons and objects are an extension of Ordeal's power system, so to add more lore and concepts to them adds to the lore and concepts of the entire verse, and such additions always make the story that much better, especially when handled the way they were in this season. Before I look at the last subject, I want to look at some of the more miscellaneous aspects of the power system that get touched on. Jose alludes to the idea that attacks that are solely chi based can be resisted by physical things that are chi infused, and this is what happens when Shay tries to burn Late's paper. The flames of Ilios may be more chi based than Late's paper, and the added chi infusion on top of that allows his paper to resist being burned by the flames. This is a somewhat similar concept to the rock armor technique, and we see it again with Shay's shield and Jose's stars, where Shay's shield is clearly more physical in nature than the stars Jose makes, which should be purely chi based, and thus the shield can resist the damage the stars cause. Private Johan partially adds to creatures made of chi when mentioning the nightmare's center of origin is their heads, and this helps make it so targeting other chi created creatures' heads is a means of trying to destroy them outright without expecting them to reform. Ephialtes mentioned his chi having a unique side effect where it makes those in his presence drowsy, eventually putting them to sleep and giving them nightmares. This shows that while most likely very rare, the chi of a talent can have its own effect related to the talent that is passive in operation. This doesn't just add to the power system but to the potential uniqueness it can bring to characters who have this same phenomenon, and makes how certain characters can strategize with it even more interesting. Lewis becomes a Sentinel class Kimyo through his use of Death Stance, which grants him temporary immortality. The concept of a Sentinel was technically introduced with Goro and Kevin last season, but the description that came with Death Stance expands on that, which describes it as the full fusion of Kimyo and talent, which means any Kimyo who fuses with their talent, whether by choice or accidentally, will be considered a Sentinel and will be temporarily or permanently immortal, with this immortality being able to heal wounds and reconstitute one's form until they are out of chi. Lewis and Dr. Hanzo introduced us to the concept of a talent infection, and Lewis was able to produce this through learning how to control his cells and attack with them. Thus, a talent infection seems to be when a Kimyo infects another with their talent binding it to their cells, causing these cells to be attacked, resulting in extreme pain or severe damage. This was also technically introduced by Vayal in Season 2, but Lewis and Dr. Hanzo provide further explanation of its intricacies. This also provides a way for us to understand how Kimyos can use chi in a manner similar to other talent types, as this is what the toxic type is said to do. Through the fight involving Konos, we learn that regeneration costs chi, and that it is a trait related to ancient talents. The first part makes sense, as Kimyos have a better base capacity to heal, with it likely being much faster than humans, but anything more than that will use chi to restore the wound that has been inflicted. The second part adds to ancient talents as well as their users, as that means some of them have the natural capacity to restore whole limbs. Through Rajani, we learn she possesses her family's talent separately from her body, and this means it's possible for talents that are meant to be wielded by a Kimyo to be acquired without a direct transfer to the soul. This may also mean that some talents, like maybe eye-related ones, have a permanent physical form that allows them to be contained for a more physical transfer. And this outright introduces a unique means of acquiring a talent, which could lead to other unique forms of talent transfer, either through a talent itself or through advanced technology. And to finish this section off, let's look at the ether and all things introduced in relation to it. The ether itself seems to be where all chi from a talent originally comes from, and where it returns to when a Kimyo dies, with Reed himself saying this exact sentiment. And since a talent and its chi are intertwined, this would mean a Kimyo's death could see a talent potentially being erased, never to be seen again. This outright explains talent saturation that Lath mentioned, which is a talent slowly growing weaker over time due to loss of chi, and why a talent won't always return. The ether also explains chi limits, as a Kimyo's chi limit is essentially how much of a boundaried space their talent occupies within the ether. And just to be clear, there is a difference between a talent being in the ether and a chi limit that relates to it. Using the diagram for proper explanation, when a talent is made by God using the endless pure chi of the ether, the chi is made unique to the talent and also given a set limit on how strong it can grow, or in other words, how much space it will then occupy in the ether. Regardless of how much chi your talent can have at its max, reaching the limit is nearly impossible. And this is what makes a god tier Kimyo, as they have reached the limit of their talent. There are only two known ways to grow this limit, with them being the pure chi fruit and Vayal's blood. If a talent's limit is increased, the space they occupy in the ether likely increases as well, which should mean the chi they have overtaken has been converted into the talent's unique chi, which adds to the talent's potential growth. This is the principle behind how Titans, Titan Generals, and the Gaki are stronger than they normally would be. The introduction of the ether directly adds to all Kimyo. It provides an inverse source for the power system while also expanding on the concept of a chi limit that was introduced in Season 2. as it gives the origins of chi as well as why Kimyos can't grow infinitely stronger, as they cannot take in more chi from it. Everything that I mentioned directly adds to Ordeal's power system by introducing something new or expanding on what was previously mentioned. I enjoy this greatly, as there were things that needed to be explored regarding what we already knew, but there were also new concepts that could be used again later, and even further explained, which is something I always look forward to. In regards to Mango's pros, we have visualization of talent growth. During the season, we see how talents can change visually while growing, such as Tevin's rhino hide evolving from season 2 to now allowing for weapon creation, Shay's war state changing, and even the new form from Lewis with Death Stance, cinematic / wide shot panel designs. Brent during the season has shown improvements and increased frequency of higher quality landscape panels, showing the scale of characters and their capabilities amongst the higher ranking individuals. Expands on the interconnection of characters. In season 3, we see Brent expand on the relationships between most of the main cast, even introducing new characters that are completely unknown to both the characters and us the readers. And in regards to Nauni's pros, we have improved art and backgrounds. As always, Brent's art continues to improve. The backgrounds in particular look noticeably better this season, and the additional detail really shows the effort put in during the break. The chapters are also longer without sacrificing visual quality, which demonstrates clear growth in Brent's artistic process since the previous season. Stronger world building and lore. Season 3 is probably the strongest of the 3 seasons in terms of world building and lore. The story explores more countries and locations than ever before, giving the world a greater sense of scale. We also learn more about Code's organization and the broader forces operating behind the scenes. Characters like Thanatos and Vaal receive more attention, which helps establish them as major antagonists moving forward. The Gaki are also explored further, and we finally get to see them in combat. In terms of the world's history and mythology, this season likely reveals more information than any previous one. Improved dialogue and character voices. Another area of improvement is the dialogue and the way Brent handles different personalities. Writing characters with very different personalities, such as a child like Yukiko or an unhinged personality like Ephialtes, is more difficult than it appears. This season does a good job giving each character a distinct tone and voice. Small details like changes in font or text color help reinforce these differences and add personality to the dialogue. Ephialtes in particular stands out as one of the more memorable minor villains, with a chaotic personality that feels distinct rather than derivative of previous characters like Rokash. The length of season 3 is one of its critical shortcomings. I actually got the chance to ask Brent about the season's length while it was running, with me saying, "Hey Brent, had a question I and a few others were wondering. How come you only want this season to be 50 episodes? A season of such importance feels like it should be longer, so I'm wondering if it's a contract thing or a personal reason." And his answer was, "Personal thing. Contract doesn't affect me. I can go as long as I'd like. I like the short and sweet end of this season." This, in my opinion, is not a good enough reason to shorten the season, as everything I will look at in later sections has the potential to be fixed by simply having more episodes for us to view. If season 1 and season 2 showed Ordeal only being a localized story in Trinidad, I would understand the lack of length, as that kind of series doesn't need a lot of episodes to tell such a story. But season 2 showed us that the top 10 strongest characters in the series live in different countries, and then put the main cast in one of those countries. Season 3 extends this concept by putting characters in Japan, the coast of Venezuela, Schehelian, and Arizona, expanding where the story takes place. And this expansive nature Ordeal has called for much more than we had gotten. This doesn't even mention that season 3 didn't make it to Brent's self-made 50 episode limit, leaving us with a subpar finale. Limiting the season's length hurt the season so much, as it directly took away episodes from different areas that could have been expanded on. This limitation also forces Brent to be very picky with what he puts in the season, which stifles what the season could really be, but also makes you wonder why certain things made it into the season as opposed to other things that may feel more important. And this brings me back to part of my question for Brent, where I stated a season of such importance feels like it should be longer. This was a season that truly begins everyone's shift in character. This season was supposed to show us how Thanatos' return and the start of war will begin to affect people, yet the season's length hardly allows for such a deeper look at the characters. Brent has mentioned more than once that he cuts things out of the season, and I have to ask, why? Part of it may be due to how relevant it actually is to what is happening, but as we see with episodes 124 and 141, we are shown things that don't have real relevance to what is happening outside of those scenes. A conversation between Thanatos and Abel has no connection to Andrea using Noragiri against Leith and Jose. So if something like that is being placed into a episode, what is stopping Brent from putting things into the season that not only extends it, but expands it? To further enhance what I mean, nothing is stopping Brent from taking that initial information at the start of 124 and making it its own episode instead, while adding other Malhazar related lore information. I think it's also proper if we look at episode length, as in my opinion, how long the episodes actually are can affect how long a season is. It's not as easy to tell, but most of season 3's episodes should be outright longer than the ones in season 2. This is likely due to Brent trying to appease his fan base, as it's not uncommon to find a comment under an episode in season 2 talking about how short it was. Because the episodes are longer, Brent can put more into them, and we can use episode 113 as an example. That episode is essentially broken into 5 parts. The first is Tevin's overview of season 2's events. The second is the 60-year flashback relating to Masato Heart. The third is Tevin and Yukiko's training sequence. The fourth is the post-training discussion, and the fifth is the code heads visiting Shay. Within those 5 parts, we are given a great amount of information, and this is what I mean, as Brent is able to put a lot of information in just one episode, and this is present throughout most of the season, with episode 132 being another example. Because the episodes are longer and have more in them, the actual episode count ends up being less for the overall season. If you don't believe me, just look at season 2, which consists of 68 episodes in comparison to season 3's 49. Season 2 is longer because less is in each episode, which means the bulk of what can be put in an episode can be spread out amongst more episodes. To fully understand what I mean, let's look at the contents of episode 91 and 99. Episode 99 is a direct continuation of what takes place at the end of episode 91, and following season 3's format would see most of these events occurring in one episode, yet they are more spread out while other things are also shown in those respective episodes. I say all this to say that the longer episodes of season 3 were great, but had a clear effect on how many episodes the season would actually have, and in my opinion, the more spread out and shorter nature of the episodes in season 2 was better, as it naturally led to a longer season. I also want to talk about pacing, as I feel season length and the pacing of the story can go hand in hand. The pacing of Ordeal has always been fast, but that wasn't a real issue with the story because there were compensating moments to bring the story back to a slightly slower pace. However, season 3 lacks the proper amount of moments to slow the story down. To understand what I mean, we have to look at what kind of story Ordeal is. Ordeal is a battle comic, so most of what moves the story forward will relate to the fights that take place, with the fights themselves being the most intense and action-packed aspect of the story, and this is usually where the pacing is the most high. This is not all though, as at some point a fight or battle has to be over, and with that, the characters will reflect on some aspect of the events that just took place. These events move the story forward, but typically at a slower pace. With that model understood, we can use Lewis's fight with Veal and his funeral as an example. The fight between Lewis and Veal spans multiple episodes, with different things occurring in the background of said conflict, and Shay eventually coming back to Trinidad. Lewis's fight and the subsequent disappearance of Azam and Yukiko helped transition Shay arriving back in Trinidad, and this is just one example of how his fight helps move the story along for other characters. When Lewis dies, we get an episode for his funeral that sees Elon Jr. doing exactly what Lewis did for Elon Sr. in season 1. The intensity of this episode does not compare to any that Lewis was fighting in, nor does it feel like we are breezing through the events in the same manner, and the details of it still help move the story forward. There are not a lot of episodes like Lewis's funeral where the pace of the story is slowed and the characters reflect in some way on the prior conflict. I relate this to season length because if there were more of these moments, then by extension the season would have just a few more episodes because of it. An example of where something like this can be placed in the season would be episode 146, where we can see how more characters dealt with or felt about what Shay had done. and this would fit as we get a 1-month skip from that moment, so nothing would truly be interrupted from what we already have. I'd also like to simply state that too much action makes the story's pacing fast, and without the proper amount of slow-paced moments, it will feel like we are needlessly rushing through the story, which is never a good thing, and a lot of Season 3 feels exactly like that. I also think it's proper if we look at an example of bad pacing that can occur during a fight. As I said before, fights are usually when the pacing is the fastest, but there are times when it can be seen as too fast. This usually doesn't occur as fights span multiple episodes while having bits of dialogue, as well as other scenes dealing with other characters being shown to help ensure the pacing of the fight isn't moving at breakneck speeds. Though, if a fight goes on for too long, then pacing can be seen as slower than it should be, and thankfully that isn't an issue here. But the Pillars vs Thanatos is an example of a fight that is paced too fast. This fight lasts only 1 episode, unlike almost all others in the season that span a minimum of 3. The deaths that occurred in the episode happen so fast and what feels like back to back that the fight is over before it really feels like it has a chance to start. And this is why the pacing of the fight is so fast, as its start and conclusion happen in a small window of time. Another aspect of this fight's pacing that makes it too fast is the skill and strength level of all the characters involved. The implication of the fight is that the Pillars as a group equate to Thanatos at that time, but even Jin is implied by Thanatos to have the capacity to kill him. This is important because if characters are on similar levels, fights involving them should naturally last longer, as there is no clear way for one to get an edge over the other, making it a back and forth. And if a character is clearly weaker than another, a fight has no reason to last long in any capacity. There are of course caveats to this, such as characters holding back, but I digress. So if the characters are supposed to be on a relatively even level, one side dying so quickly greatly excels the pacing due to us not being given proper enough reasoning and showcase as to why they lost. And this will cause readers to care less about the repercussions caused by the quick loss. In other words, speeding through a fight like that feels like it was handled with less care than others, which causes readers to also hardly care about the fight as well. Now, I was originally going to place what I'm about to talk about next in a different section, but it fits a lot better here. The seasons of Ordeal need to be longer, and I don't say this as a superfan who wants more of the series he enjoys, but I say this from the perspective of a writer who can tell when more of the story can and needs to be told. We are still missing key and critical information regarding some of the foundational aspects of the series, and the only way we will get that information is if it gets put into the series. But it is no secret that Brent felt fatigued during Season 3's run, so even if he plans to put more into a season, his health and well-being should take precedence. So the question now becomes, what can be done to ensure the seasons are longer moving forward? The first idea would be to shorten the episodes to what they were during Season 2. That way, not only is the information of the season a bit more spread out, but the week-to-week fatigue Brent may feel will be lessened, as he would technically have less to draw each week, and he can have a season run continuously until it is over. However, there is a potentially better alternative that Brent had mentioned during the Otaku Fix interview that he brought back up during a more recent stream.
So like for season 4, I don't want what happened with season 3 to happen, so I'm trying to learn from my mistakes, because I had to cut season 3 short and I couldn't fit in a lot of the plots that I wanted to, and like entire arcs I couldn't do it because just time ran out on me. So to avoid that, I am planning to do season 4 in 2 parts. Part 1, take a break, part 2 before the hiatus. So ideally they'll be the same length. So part 1 should be, ideally, this is just a ballpark number, ideally 30 episodes, then a break before part 2, which is another 30 episodes. So the season should be like 60 episodes or so. That's just a rough number.
There are a few reasons why I would call this a better alternative. The first is fatigue, as a definitive break has a better chance of clearing Brent's inevitable drawing fatigue, as well as week-to-week worry, taking from his mental fatigue as well. The second is episode length, as this can better guarantee the episodes of future seasons stay similar lengths to the longer ones in Season 3, due to Brent being able to achieve what he did during Season 3's run while having 2 breaks during it. And the last is season length, as 2 parts of a set number guarantee the seasons will be longer more consistently. However, the only thing I disagree with is the number of 30 episodes per part that Brent proposed, as that number doesn't feel like enough, especially since it would only lead to 60 total episodes, which is less than the longest season. I don't think any part moving forward should be less than 38 episodes, as that number at the very least guarantees we would match Season 2's length. But if the goal is to make seasons longer, then the parts for the season should be closer in length to the series' shortest season, which would be Season 1 at 44 episodes. This would give us 88 total episodes for the seasons moving forward, 20 more episodes than Season 2, but with more of Season 3's episode length. This to me feels perfect and doesn't feel like asking too much or asking too little based on the work Brent has already done in the past. Ordeal suffers from a lack of character exploration and development, and this isn't simply a Season 3 specific issue, but a problem across the series as a whole. However, this season in particular truly fails to capitalize on the potential of seeing certain characters develop and be better understood. Character development is how the reader can observe the character changing step by step through the narrative. They can identify development by noticing how the character's traits change as the story progresses. Now, not every character that is introduced needs to be developed, nor does a character that is being developed need to have it done up front and center, as development can come in small and passive ways. However, that doesn't matter if we aren't even being given a chance to sit with a character and understand who they are and who they may become. And the way Brent has structured the story so far, only a select few characters get that privilege, which leaves the wider cast he has left out, and as individuals we have to wait to learn even basic information about. But there are clear opportunities for more characters to be dove into. Let's now look at certain characters I feel should have had more direct development, and for our first example, let's look at Kevin Morales. Season 2 gives us introductory information about Kevin, such as the fact he destroyed his body trying to control his talent's power. We even see him acknowledge that his instability is why he was placed on the moon base away from humanity. Season 3 gives us more insight on how Kevin actually feels about the situation he has been in, expressing frustration at his lack of mastery and the problems that come from it. We then see how he feels in relation to Leo's passing, as he could not repay the debt he feels he owed Leo. And this is where the problem with Kevin starts. At this point, we understand who he is and how he truly feels about his situation. Yet we don't know how he got to this point. We don't know what Kevin was like before he destroyed his body, nor do we have insight on his actual interpersonal relationship with Leo. It feels like episode 116 is a perfect segue into actually showing us the details of what Kevin described in that episode from a past point in time where we see him destroy his body, and maybe how his looking up to Leo caused that to happen. Yet Brent fails to capitalize on this potential exploration of Kevin and simply moves past it while saying Kevin is mourning, even though Kevin mourning could have looked like us seeing moments from his past. This was a surprise to me, as Brent previously mentioned that the season would focus on Kevin, so I fully expected to see what had already been mentioned twice last season, with that being the destruction of his body. And to not show us a flashback related to it hampers Kevin's character and puts a big pause on his development, as the destruction of his body is a very big part of who he is, not just to the reader, but in the world of Ordeal itself. Kevin is also mourning Leo, and not seeing more of what would cause him to feel so deeply about his death makes his reaction to the news about it feel hollow, as it lacks full substance and depth. Brent has shown in Season 3 that he can provide a character with a single flashback episode dedicated to expanding on who they are, so not doing so for a character like Kevin is a huge letdown. Andrea is a character who I feel had her development snuffed, but it was not in the same way as Kevin. Kevin's development is halted due to the lack of knowledge regarding his past, but Andrea's development was stunted due to her connection to Shay. I want to preface this by saying Andrea does not need to develop and go all the way back to her former glory in just one season, but there should be clear things in place that start the progression of her character, and in my opinion, they are lacking or outright non-existent in Season 3. Andrea's loss to Goro broke her, and made her feel as if she was a shame to the Thomas family name. Shay removed some of this burden by granting her his last name of Hart, a name that is already stained due to the massacre. However, from this point on, there is no real progression from Andrea in relation to how she felt about herself, and she essentially becomes just Shay's fiance throughout the course of the season. Andrea being Shay's fiance would not be bad if we saw things from either character that began to build Andrea back up. For example, Shay tells Andrea, "You may have been marred in battle, but what was birthed through those ashes is a warrior no longer afraid of defeat, for she has already overcome it." And this feels like it's in relation to Andrea saying she doesn't need to be at her best, she only needs to win, which means she has gotten past her defeat from Goro and feels that no matter what, she must claim victory. This mentality is what leads her to curse herself, but she isn't fully given the chance to show her newfound conviction, as Shay intervenes before she can take out Leith or do more damage to Jose. And this is when her character becomes stifled, as following this, Shay claims Noragiri, now known as Zahara, for himself, which directly affects Andrea's overall power, as that was the strongest weapon in her arsenal, and was a clear means to show her character growth. However, Andrea does not need Noragiri to enhance her character and show how she can progress, as there were two other routes that could have started that process. Andrea wielding Malhazar's sword would have been the perfect way to tie in Shay removing Andrea's burden of the Thomas name by giving her something on the level of Zahara but is related to the hearts, the name she will eventually carry herself. This not only replaces a power she lost but helps strengthen the connection between her and Shay. There is also the idea of looking more at Andrea's autonomy, which would see her reflecting on the Thomas name and the power that comes with it, which directly relates to the portion of Ilios that was given to her. This could have evolved her 5% to take on a different effect like Shay and Leo did themselves. Or we could simply see Andrea incorporate more Ilios use into her standard combat as a sign of her accepting what it means to be a Thomas and showing that to the world. For example, instead of a normal insurrection wave, imagine Andrea did a Ilios enhanced insurrection wave. Andrea is a notable character that has been around since season 1. Her loss to Goro regressed her character, and at no point do we ever get a conversation, item, or showcase that actually allows Andrea's character to start her progression back to how she used to be. Azam might be the best example for the points I'm trying to make, though I have less to say about him as his issue is different from the prior two, but far more direct. We know the type of character Azam is supposed to become, with that being a wrathful rogue. However, we hardly see his progression into that role. Azam was already at the doorstep of what he's supposed to be due to the loss of Joanna in season 2, with Yukiko saying he hasn't been the same since the stadium incident. She also says it feels like there's a gap between Azam and the other cubs that he won't close. This sets up Azam's eventual distancing from the others. Azam then loses Lewis, and the rage he feels from it seems to cause a permanent separation between him and the other cubs, as we don't see him for the rest of the season. But it also feels like after Lewis's funeral, Azam is forgotten about. We don't see how Lewis's death and the passing on of his talent to Elon Jr. affects him over time. We don't know how he's dealing with his emotions, nor if the mentor he was training with in the likes of Abijah is trying to help subdue his brewing rage. An entire month goes by after Lewis's funeral, and none of that time is used to explore and set up what Azam will become in the future. And without that added depth regarding Azam's internal conflict, it doesn't feel like what happened to him is enough to justify what he will become in the Ronin era. Ordeal has a large cast of characters. Some may say that's an issue, but I would disagree, as the real issue comes to when, where, and how characters are used. Many of the characters we've known about since season 2 go unused and are nothing but afterthoughts compared to the characters that are more prevalent in the season. But even characters who have clear potential to be used in the season get sidelined for no real reason, or are handled improperly. There are a few characters I'll look at in this section that can fit being unused or misused, and the character I want to look at first is Anton. But before that, I want to quickly mention the fact that Bonnie was made 7th Lord in season 2 and was replaced by Reed in season 3, and goes completely unmentioned and unused the entire season, with the story not officially confirming if she retired, which would justify her not being used in the season. Now, in season 3, Anton was made into a codehead, yet we never truly see him in that role. This partially makes sense as Anton is only made a new codehead at the start of the season, and in the story's timeline has only been a codehead for 4 months in total as of season 3's end. He does 2 official things as a codehead, but the first shows his ability to move independent from them in regards to the other cubs. While this is an interesting concept, it would have hit a lot harder had we actually seen Anton interact with the other heads more often, such as in meetings, or the training Aldrich mentions in episode 115. Since the codeheads are seemingly numbered based on tenure rather than strength, Anton being the new 7th head could have been used as insight as to how the heads train and bond with a new member. We also could have gotten a better understanding as to how code works, but from Anton's disassociative and less verbal perspective. The bond between the codeheads is also very important as it directly relates to ordained judgment, and not seeing Anton actually bond with the heads makes it to where that technique is not a viable option if it needed to be used again. To circumvent all of these issues, it would have made more sense if Anton was made a codehead earlier in the 8-month time skip, where instead of getting an invitation to join the codeheads in episode 113, he would instead show up with Aldrich, Nico, and Hanjiro. And just like Yukiko did with Azam near the end of episode 114, we could have her make mental comments on how Anton's been training on and off with the other heads. This would allow him to train and grow his talent with the other cubs while also showing his initial steps in the codehead role. Anton also being a part of the events in episode 114 would help with this as well, as it would give him starter experience in relaying information to the masses of individuals under him. So we could have had him speaking about Gary and Ian's situations before Aldrich took over and actually explain the Armageddon plan. This would also make sense as Anton is from the same place Gary and Ian's situation arose from. Anton being a codehead is very good, as it shows the difference in what all the Cubs will become. But to not use Anton in that role to initially set up how he will be as a codehead feels off, especially because he's a main character, and forces readers to do more guesswork in that regard than needed, or makes us not fully care about such a change to his character. The next set of characters I want to look at are the ones involved in episode 132, specifically the god tier we see looking at the information related to Shay's body. In this scene we have Kofi, Bree, as well as Reed, and in my opinion these are not the best characters that can be used for this scene. None of these three have the same potential relation to Shay that three of the other god tier actually do. You can argue that Kofi should be here based on what Eric says to him in episode 128 about Shay's body needing to be studied, but someone like Bree, who gets no screen time after this episode, doesn't need to be one of the people seeing and understanding this information. Reed and Kofi were the most agitated and cautious of Shay in episode 128, so you could say they would be the most eager to understand how Shay's body works. Yet there's still room to argue that Mikhail and Minamoto would fit this scene better. Mikhail can replace Reed in explaining how Shay's body works, and this makes sense as Mikhail already understands Shay's grander purpose, so it would feel right for him to be the one who explains and understands how Shay works physically as opposed to spiritually. Minamoto, on the other hand, has an actual connection to Leo himself that we saw in season 2, so it would feel right for him to be there as he would be understanding how Leo's successor works. Minamoto also had interactions with Lewis in season 2, giving him a direct connection to the Cubs, even telling Lewis that each of them possesses Leo's ember. So again, it would feel right for him to be present to learn of the Cub who has the most of Leo's ember in a very literal sense. Minamoto's connection to a Cub can also be a reason as to why one could argue Abijah should be present as well. However, I think Vatic is an even better pick, as he and Shay are related by talent, and even further so with the reveal of Shay's chi. Though Okeanos is the one who speaks in episode 128, I highly doubt he is aware of how Shay's chi actually works, especially since he is considered an anomaly. And if he does, you could have him be present and actually be the one to partially explain how Shay's body works, with Mikhail still adding his research related input. Vatic being here would help reinforce the plan introduced in episode 114, with him now having partial understanding as to how integral Shay can actually be in the final battle. If you don't think any one member of the god tier has more importance in regards to receiving this information, that simply means all of them should have been present in this scene, and that would make sense since almost all of them are cautious when it comes to the new development. I see this part of the episode as an example of misused characters, as we have clear others who can add far more depth to the scene than what we actually got, or we can simply involve everyone that was present for the situation that caused this scene to be needed in the first place. Keeping Mikhail in focus, I think he's an example of a character who has a clear potential to be used more in the season, but gets somewhat sidelined. And this comes from what he proposed at the end of episode 128, as well as him seemingly having a vision that relates to the events of 145. At the end of 128, Mikhail proposes that he would substitute his life for Shay's, and if Shay broke the stipulations they set, Mikhail would go to the execution on Shay's behalf. This act gave Mikhail a very clear purpose in the story that goes unfulfilled. You could argue that Shay was giving Andrea constant updates of his location, but it's unknown if she was to relay that information to code. It's also unknown what sort of rules First Table members are exempt from, but I feel like killing all of your present comrades is grounds for execution, yet Mikhail is not apprehended for what Shay had done, and this makes me wonder why introduce a way to use his character if it wasn't going to be capitalized on at the proper moment. Mikhail's statements in episode 145 and 146 seem to coincide with a sort of vision he has been shown, meaning to a certain extent he knows what will happen for certain events, and this could include Lewis's death. With this being established, I think Mikhail's character could have also been partially used as a means of trying to prevent Lewis's death, and this could have been present up until the moment he actually dies. Mikhail could have interpreted God's vision as a worst case scenario that could lead Shay down the wrong path, so he would try to alter the pivotal moment relating to it. Mikhail could have replaced Abijah in episode 141, as we don't see him anytime after Lewis's funeral, meaning he's no longer relevant for the events. Yet Mikhail stays around and is a direct part of the following events. This would make Mikhail's guilt feel even more heavy in episode 143, and from a writing standpoint could show how we as humans confuse God's vision by using our own understanding of it, since Lewis's death is supposed to lead Shay to who he's meant to be as opposed to away from it. Mikhail has some of the clearest presence in the season, yet he's never used in a way that capitalizes on what is established in regards to him. Now I want to look at the characters that were used in the worst way this season, with that being the pillars. I'm going to say it here, then I'll reiterate it later, but the pillars are only used as a way to make Thanatos stronger, and their team-related dynamic is never truly relevant. In episode 114, Lewis tells us that the pillars have been on the front lines since the creation of the table, yet we don't actually know how long that is. And when we see Grimbor again in episode 128, he mentions himself that he has been on the front lines longer than most, and again, we don't know how long that is. In this scene, Jin could have been used as a means of signifying how long the pillars have been established and slightly expand upon what they actually do, cementing their importance in relation to code. As in the same episode, we find out the god tier are sworn by oath to stop Thanatos, making that their grand purpose. The pillars also show immediate loyalty to Shay in this episode, which doesn't make the most sense as Shay was just made to be the leader of a group that has been together for who knows how long, and are implied later by Junie to have been close-knit. So while there should be a form of respect among them, there should have also been a buildup as to why they would oppose the god tier for Shay outside of it being against the rules to detain Shay. Buildup would also add to the apology Jin gives Shay, as it would now hold more weight, and could lead to Shay seeming saddened by their deaths, as it feels like he doesn't care that they died at all. The pillars are said to be a formidable foe meant to stand together, yet that concept is never capitalized on. We never truly see a foe the pillars themselves would need to face that the other characters in the series couldn't team up to fight. The introduction of a unique team-oriented group isn't bad, but if we never see them in that role, what's the point of creating them in the first place? It would have made more sense if we saw them face another group or strong individual outside of Thanatos. That way there is justification for the need of a group like theirs to exist. But even if we did, the consistent duo dynamic we see throughout the series could lead one to say there doesn't even need to be 4 pillars to begin with, as 2 could do the same job. Looking at what each pillar brings in terms of character, Eric is clearly used as the brains of the group, Jin seems like the leader who is also the strongest, and Junie has shown a clear ability to gather information, and that makes Tandor nothing more than an extra individual put on the team. It's very easy to combine what Jin and Junie bring into one character, which leaves us with a defensive strategist in the form of Eric and an information gathering powerhouse in the form of this Jin-Junie hybrid. Now, as I said previously, the pillars are used as a way to make Thanatos stronger, and that is a horrible purpose to give characters that were just introduced, especially when you don't give them any form of depth that could take away from this. Now you may wonder how we know this is what the pillars are used for, and it comes from the fact Shay tells them to find Thanatos, yet we never see them looking for him, and in turn we see Thanatos show up where they are and say verbatim that their chi will bring him closer to his former glory. This right here sets up that they are being used to make Thanatos' power grow, and their lack of depth in other known areas makes it so this is truly their only reason to be in the season. If you don't understand what I'm getting at, I'll sum it up right here. The pillars were an interesting concept introduced this season, yet what's supposed to make them stand out among other characters, that being their independent movement outside of Code's law and their talent-related synergy, never actually does so. Their independent movement isn't used enough to make it feel like a grand perk of being in the group, nor does it help add to what they do in the world of Ordeal. Their talent synergy is hardly relevant since we don't see it used at its peak, and the concept of synergy has been and can be replicated by other characters. These things mixed with who they end up fighting against makes them nothing more than fodder that ends up making Thanatos look good and grow in power. To circumvent these issues, the pillars should have been introduced sooner or used more this season, with every time we see them adding to what makes them different from other ranked members of Code, as well as how their synergy is far more grand than anything else we may see in the series. Since I've gone over the grand examples in the season of how characters go unused or misused, I want to look at a few minor examples. In episode 116, we see Kasagita, Ilios, and Okeanos have a brief conversation, which means it's possible for them to speak to each other independently of their users. So I ask, if they were used this way in one episode, why were they not used that same way in another episode where it fits? And I'm talking about episode 128, where Okeanos speaks to Shay through Vatic, but why would he not speak to Ilios directly instead? In episode 114, Mikhail is said to be the head of the search exercise for Thanatos, yet I fail to see why he would be used instead of Abijah. The reason Abijah seems like a better pick to me is because in episode 46, we are told he is head of most covert operations in the world. Aldrich also mentions the search exercise not being a priority, so to me it would make sense if the assassin character who was stated to have worldly covert operations were to lead the global search for Thanatos. And it being more covert and not priority makes it easier to explain why it's not seen in the season. Lastly, Ian is freed from his cell and does absolutely nothing. He's not used in any way that would add to himself, any character around him, or the situation he was shown in. His situation is addressed at the start of the season, ignored for most of it, then he is brought back into the cast to be sidelined. Ordeal has an overarching issue with how many characters actually get a chance to showcase their abilities and what they are capable of. The series suffers from lacking in the concept of show don't tell, as we are more prone to get implications and statements rather than actual character showcases and feats. Implications and statements are fine, but they fall off when there is no feat to pair with it. We aren't merely reading a book, we are reading a webtoon, so we expect to actually see the things characters are implied or said to be able to do. And there are far too many characters in the series for us to have such a lack of actual showcase to pull from any one of them. Season 3 adds to this problem, as we got far less showcases than what we were truly expecting. For example, I wholeheartedly believed Tevin would actually fight someone when Lewis was said to be leaving in episode 129, and this would have given us a chance to see the implied progress Tevin had made over the 8-month time skip. Yet the only thing we have to show for that are the keratin weapons he can make in a different rhino hide design, which implies his hide was upgraded like the last 2 times before. Tevin doesn't get to show how lion hide, hammer hide, or blacksmith forge as a whole might have improved, and then never gets a chance to show off any of his improvements as the season went on. This is truly a shame, as Tevin is one of the most important characters in the series due to him being Shay's durotagonist. He is literally Shay's moral foil in the series, and the fights during the Greenland Ball directly show this, as Shay is immediately willing and able to kill Sota once he threatens the life of Yukiko. But Tevin is hesitant and initially unwilling to kill Ryu, even though he is actively bringing death to the Greyhound soldiers. A fight that not only explored Tevin's power growth, but his character growth was highly needed in this season. This would have looked like Tevin fighting a Kimyo that is aiding the pirates, and during it having a conversation on why they are both willing to kill for the humans they fight alongside. Tevin himself could even use a new hide from Blacksmith Forge to further show his resolve, with the hide being shark related due to them fighting on rigs in the ocean. The shark related hide could not only relate to the water around them, but also to the shark Kimyo Nanaku Tevin witnesses Shay fight in season 1, and could show how, in Brent's own words, Tevin can have absolutely anything he wants in Blacksmith Forge, being able to look at another Kimyo's talent or abilities and replicate them or expand upon them with his hide. And this would show that Tevin has become far more versatile with his talent, which is something Rokash and Andreas said he lacked. Another example of an outright lack of showcase would be in relation to the God tier and the Gaki. We only saw a God tier and his hand fight, as well as 2 Gaki, even though there is clear potential to see much more than that. Episode 144 and 145 have 2 God tier, 2 hands, and 4 Gaki present, yet none of them engage in any capacity, and Gary is the only character who showcases anything in both of those episodes. Brent showed us Reed's talent description 3 episodes prior, so Gary's attack should have been used for Reed instead to showcase what his talent looks like when in action. It also doesn't explicitly need to be Reed who gets a showcase involving Roberto, as Ian was also shown to be around during that time, and Roberto implied he wanted to fight him. So having Ian throw a lance that damages Roberto and leads into a fight works just as well. Either way, Roberto is the only Gaki of real relevance during that time, as he actively transforms, so that's 3 characters right there with a potential interaction that could lead into a grander showcase. The entirety of 144 and 145 is just wasted showcase potential, as we get implications for Mikhail and his hand Alice, yet no actual action. Gary shoots Roberto, but does nothing when the Corrosion Gaki shows up, even though that specific Gaki is the reason his face is scarred. All of these characters are present for what amounts to nothing but multiple monologues that lead into 0 action, which is bad since the series is action and combat based. Not everything will lead into fights, but this was one of the most pivotal moments in the series during what was supposed to be the start of war. So the question is really, why aren't they fighting and giving us more showcase even if they aren't long and drawn out fights? You can still have Shay kill everyone, but to not have a couple of characters showcase what they can do before that was a waste of time. Now I want to look at the pillars showcase during the season and why the showcase is not only bad, but why a lack of prior showcase can make characters look even worse. Based on how it's written, I am a firm believer that out of all pillars, Grimoire Jin has to be present for this fight, as he is by technicality the only one who is seen as relative to Thanatos. However, that doesn't stop me from saying that Junie truly doesn't have to leave, as the information could have been found by people who discovered the aftermath of the fight. Our 4-man squad that's meant to fight together was reduced to 3 based on that decision, and then immediately following this, Eric was taken out and Junie was heavily injured. And this is where the first mistake was made. Eric in that small time shows he likely has the fastest reaction speed of the pillars and can block one attack from Thanatos, but that's all. He doesn't get to show off how useful he can truly be from a defensive standpoint. We see his talent has good range, but nothing more about it and his skill with it is dove into. His talent is known amongst code, and he is the 15th bearer of it, and you're telling me that only deserves 2 simple moves? He deserved to still be present to help the others later in the fight, so we could actually see how far his skill with the talent truly goes. It's also not impossible to have Eric be injured while still being able to cling to life for a little while longer, and actually aid his team. Junie's injury made her useless, and literally left her with no showcase at all. We aren't told what her talent is, how she fights with it, or what her combat role is amongst her group. She is the 2nd strongest member of the pillars, initially willing to fight, and she literally does nothing of note during this fight's episode. This group is said to be a formidable foe meant to stand together, so why is the 2nd strongest person of it reduced to nothing in a matter of moments? Junie does not have to be injured here, and would have made Eric's own statement of the 2nd strongest formation being a 3-man point become true, as she would have been made the actual 3rd member, and takes it even further as this formation would be hyper offensive in comparison to what Eric was likely thinking of, as Junie could help match Jin and Tandor's tempo. Tandor possesses a talent that is stated to be a descendant of Okeanos. So how is it that he can't do anything against Thanatos? He was said to possess great elemental control, but none of the combinations he uses on Thanatos have any effectiveness. If he has such grand control, why can't he manipulate his combinations after they are made, so that even if they don't do much initially, they can be made useful at a later point? Tandor creates a mud wall that completely surrounds them, showing his talent has great outward coverage, but both distance related attacks are shut down, and he doesn't even get a chance to show what the wind and lightning combination can actually do. Tandor with the Hothberg's talent is said to release combinations of at least 2 elements, meaning it should be possible for him to mix 3 elements together, yet he never even attempts that. And this is only made worse by the fact his sacrifice was a combination we had already seen amount to nothing prior. So why not instead at the end of your life release every element you have at once for the potential to do more? Jin is the strongest pillar, yet even he fails to make a lasting impression with his showcase. Jin is the fastest haste user we've seen at this point, but that does nothing to catch Thanatos off guard, and at every instance Jin attacks him, Thanatos can react to him, which makes his speed redundant. Grimoire being able to move in and out of the future hardly gives him any advantage during the fight, as it's not like we see him actively using the information from the future to help prevent things occurring in the past, nor use the knowledge of Thanatos' own moves against him. Which is crazy because his talent at the end shows him a direct moment from the future which could have been used to keep him alive for later or do more lasting damage. Grimoire's use with the Havoc talent was said to take directly from Kataigita, which is likely a nod to how we see him fight in episode 24. But the added implication of that statement does not truly add to the power Grimoire actually displayed during that fight, and in that same vein, neither does his blades having the weight of both the present and the future. Essentially, the Pillar's showcase against Thanatos was bad because each member is taken out without doing anything meaningful, which leads to them as a group showing no real form of synergy, as they do nothing to help the next man that's left standing after them. And each pillar's individual use of their talent is shown at the most basic level, which doesn't show the skill they actually have acquired with them, which is sad because they are implied to have fought longer than most. So how is it against Thanatos, the grand threat of the series, they are using their talents as if they were just given to them? And this exact sentiment leads into my next point. This was Brent's first time writing a conflict involving these characters, so he had to show what their talents can do on a base level. But because the fight only lasted one episode and we hadn't seen a showcase from them prior, this was all that we got from them. To understand what I mean, we can look at Lewis. He had prior showings with his talent before fighting Bayal, and was shown doing two entirely new things by the fight's end. We can also look at Kofi, whose display is very consistent with his talent description, and gets taken further when Tyson leaks and he shows off two new attacks. Having an initial showcase sets up how the character's powers work, then later on there was room to expand on what they can do, but the pillars weren't given that luxury. So what they actually showcase ends up looking poor, especially for the level of character they are supposed to be. And this not only goes for the skill they showcase with their talents, but the synergy they are supposed to have with each other as well. All of this adds on to why the pillars dying to Thanatos in one episode feels so wrong, as they are supposed to be some of the most battle-hardened Kimyos out there, but their showcase against him has them looking like they have never fought with one another or have never fought someone at such a high level. We should have gotten a showcase soon after Shay told Jin to find Thanatos that showcases all of the pillars' talents and their synergy against a Jose or captain level opponent. That way, when the pillars actually do fight Thanatos, the base level skills they displayed against a strong opponent can be taken further, and the power level they display against him isn't put into question. This helps further show that experience in combat is highly important in the world of Ordeal, as Thanatos may not be as strong or is only as strong as their prior opponent, but his knowledge on how to counter talents allows him to get the edge and definitive win over them. I just looked at why the pillars showcase during the season was bad, but they are also a clear example for another point I want to make. Brent at some points will make a character's showcase look good, then bad, then look good again. And this, in my opinion, is usually done for the character's opponent to look better for a brief moment. This doesn't happen often, but when it happens, it's very noticeable. The pillars are the most extreme example of this, however, they never truly look good to begin with, and in turn, Thanatos looks amazing against them. But Lewis vs Veal and Kofi vs Konos have examples of this as well. In Lewis's fight against Veal, the latter is the one who has the advantage more often than not, yet Lewis can still hold his own against him. This is until episode 138, where Lewis's showcase and actions pale in comparison to what he does before and after that episode. In episode 134, he uses his Ash creations to create an opening to land a successful hit on Veal. In episode 135, he and Veal are going back and forth, blocking or dodging the other's moves, until Lewis lands a clear uppercut, with his Ash Gorilla following up moments later to land a hit itself. After all of that, Veal still nearly kills Lewis, and he saves himself by using the initial version of Death Stance, while also landing another punch on Veal. In episode 136, Lewis fully enters Death Stance, and he and Veal continue to go back and forth. In all of those instances, Lewis is matching Veal's skill, yet all of that gets thrown away in episode 138, where Lewis is shown in such a way it feels like all of his moves are made to give Veal a clear opening. His first move isn't bad and more so shows Veal's skill, but after that, he uses his Ash Sword to stop Dotanil and never gets it back, throws his lance at Veal, which he blocks, shoots an arrow at Veal, which he blocks, readies an obvious punch that Veal stops with his foot, and then readies another punch that Veal catches. Every action here makes Lewis's showcase look outright bad and diminishes the skill we just saw him exude episodes prior, while in turn making Veal look amazing. But when that episode is over, the fight from here on goes back to being somewhat more even. In Kofi's fight against Konos, he's never truly at a disadvantage until Konos begins using 3 talents at once. However, Kofi is in his overflow form at this point as well, which helps keep them on a more even playing field. The issue comes in episode 158, when Kofi is able to be restricted by Konos' use of Eloin's branches, as well as his use of the rebuke technique not doing a large enough amount of damage to truly push Konos back. But then in the following episode, Kofi is able to bombard Konos with a barrage of punches, split him in 2, take off his arm with Twin Spear, and almost destroy him with Rebuke. This makes me wonder if episode 158 was shown the way it was to make Konos look better, even though Kofi had the capacity to deal with him while in his overflow form. And if that's the case, I ask, why show the fight in such a way? Why make one character look worse so the other character can look better, just to invert it and make the character you just had looking objectively worse look far better now? This type of showcase is especially weird to me since there is no actual reason the characters are doing worse or better than they were before, as there's no major difference in how they are fighting. Again, this isn't a consistent aspect of Brent's writing, but it is very clear when it occurs, and I want to give an example within the story of characters having proper reasons for doing better than their opponents. During the Greenland Ball in season 2, all of the Cubs face and overcome the Titans they fight. Shay is able to best Sota through an emotional amp that allows him to tap into an aspect of his power he wasn't aware of, making him outright stronger than him for a brief moment. Anton stopped holding back and used his presumed highest percent shift, which was far stronger than Jirohime. Andrea uses the Flames of Ilios and her tactical mindset to overcome Vince, who was a natural counter to her. and Tevin pushes his hide further, allowing him to walk and attack in Ryu's field. If you look back at those fights, everyone is relatively even to their opponent, and there is a consistent back and forth up until the very moment they showcase a power that helps them claim victory. And there is no oddball instance where they are made to look objectively worse for no real reason. Yukiko had a showcase that I was disappointed by, and this came from me wanting to see how she'd be different from Sabito. The reason for my disappointment came from the fact that I felt she should have used black ice near the end of her aspect of the fight with Ephialtes, as we see the black lightning-like effect around her, but she is only producing Hisame's normal ice. But after hearing Wolf Nara aka Code Archives' take on that, my opinion has shifted.
Now, the Heart Clan is a clan born without fear. We do see Yukiko experience fear, but she is half heart. A true Heart Clan member may not have been born with fear, so when Hisame had settled on a host in the Heart Clan, it was suitable to bring out its full potential. Keep in mind, talents are melded to the personality of the users and a reflection of that. So this one line ties into Hisame stating that he is unable to use his full potential if Yukiko feels fear. Now, during a recent stream, I want to say part 2 of J reread, he said Summon Ice should have been consistent with the tall pillar moment against the Nightmare, since Yukiko has the red lightning around the sword. But with a line such as this, in that moment Yukiko tried to hide her fear with rage, rushing chi out. We see the same red lightning that we see with black ice. This could essentially be an artistic point where the black ice was intentions of Yukiko, but due to her fears, she was unable to use Hisame at its full potential. The first time we see her use it was relatively early in the fight. This is the point where she is more confident in her ability dealing with the immortality.
What Nara says explains why Yukiko wasn't able to use black ice at the end of her fight, as her genetics and emotional state are key factors that affect if Hisame can be used at his full potential. However, my disappointment is still present, as there is another place she should have used black ice that takes into account what Nara said. In episode 129, after she used black ice in episode 123, she sees the core of the nightmare she is facing. She also guesses that the core is the reason he is able to regenerate, which Azam confirms when we see him destroy the core of the nightmare he was fighting. So my question is, why didn't Yukiko use black ice again after seeing the damage it did and knowing what to destroy? The way her section in episode 129 ends makes it feel like that's what she was going to do, but we see she is still facing her nightmare in episode 130. At that point in the fight, she was confident in her abilities, so there's nothing hindering Hisame yet, which means she can still use black ice unhindered. We also know of her intellect and her ability to plan ahead that we see in episode 113, so why does her fight not consist of any foresight related planning? She knows that she can damage him with her stronger technique, she knows where and what to strike for, so why does she not devise a plan to use black ice in the most strategic way possible? This also wouldn't entirely affect what we see later, as her plan could still fail due to her fear now coming into play, and her display in 131 can still be shown. But if her plan were to succeed, it would only go to show the raw potential she actually has. Andrea using Noragiri, or Norodrea as she's been called, might be one of the best showcases during the season. However, I do think there's an aspect of her use of the weapon that was incomplete. In episode 117, Andrea and Aldrich discuss the concept of Andrea using Noragiri with her mechanical arm. However, when we see Andrea actually decide to use Noragiri in episode 123, she does so with her right arm, starting the corruptive process, and granting her all of its strength. With this being the case, we missed out on seeing the concept that was discussed in episode 117, and if we did, it would have better shown the difference in power between Leith and Andrea, as well as show what Andrea or her talent are capable of on a more base level. What I mean by this is, almost every time we see Andrea fight, she is accompanied by some form of scale as well as her talent weapon's actual ability. But Noragiri has no real ability to grant Andrea, nor would she be able to use a form of scale. So she would be fighting Leith with just her talent's capacity to master all combat techniques associated with martial weapons. A fight between this version of Andrea and the Leith we see in episode 123 fulfills what's mentioned in episode 117, and would better establish the power and scale difference between the two characters, as Leith has more enhanced power through the blood boost he gained from Veal, while Andrea would be relying solely on the skill her talent provides her. This also gives Andrea more reason to switch the arm she is using Noragiri with, as Leith would likely be overpowering Andrea, which makes sense considering how easily he could break from Ettore Jiro's chains, as well as how ineffective the blades from the weapon were. It would have also made sense for Andrea to try and dual wield Ettore Jiro and Noragiri, which can also better lead to Norodrea as well. I want to end this section by revisiting the starting point of it. and I want to do so by looking at Shay. Before the season began, we got a sneak peek at one of the panels, with that being the one about a great battle in regards to where Shay was training. We were then told in episode 114 that Shay had been using Titans as live combat practice, and that he was taking their insignias as trophies. These are the kind of statements that are much more interesting when we actually get to see them take place. Yes, we see some of the results of Shay's training as the season went on, such as Sun through Moon, the mountain-sized Tomas he creates, as well as how his combat style has changed, but considering we see Shay at the end of his training, it would have been justifiable to use the Great Battle as a base level showcase for Shay's growth. And it would have been even better if Shay himself is the one who states he feels done with his training once he wins the conflict. This also wouldn't intercede with any of what we see appear in the season, such as Shay's new state design, Venter's broken handle, or Shay speaking to Ilios about Sun through Moon and Zahara, as this would be a base Shay fighting with just the Ilios talent in his bare hands like what we saw in the Street Fighter and Ordeal collab episode, but it would be much more barbaric since that would fit better with how Shay is designed at that point in time. The scaling of Ordeal is inconsistent, and this applies to many aspects of the series. For a baseline example, we are told in Season 2 that the God tier can reshape continents, and this puts continental destruction as the baseline for that tier of character. Yet the only characters who display such power and make that statement true are Kevin, Shay, and Vatic, with their star level feat, moon level feat, and the feat of penetrating to the Earth's core. The problem comes in when characters on those levels attempt to or actually display feats that are far below the baseline. An example of this would be Jose, who threatens to destroy Shinjuku. However, it would have made more sense for him to threaten to destroy all of Japan, instead of just one city in it. And you could even extend the range of his potential destruction by saying his stars could reach parts of China and Russia. Jose threatens to destroy something far below what he should be capable of for the power level he is at, and then gets eclipsed by the side effects of Sun through Moon, which actually did destroy Shinjuku, with the actual attack having moon levels of damage potential and the implication of it being able to harm the planet itself. Essentially, it feels like what the characters should be able to do and what they actually can are far different. Another example would be Kofi, a character in the God tier who should have the capacity to destroy all of the United States, if the continental statement was true. Yet in his fight, he's only a partial threat to the state of Arizona, with his strongest attack seemingly only doing about mountain levels of damage. His radiation is also odd to me, as the humans are perfectly fine standing in the range of him they were in, but it makes more sense for them to be in danger and affected by his radiation the moment Tyson started leaking. These things directly put the scale of what he can do far beneath the seemingly established baseline. To slightly circumvent this, he should have caused more widespread damage to the entire state, and even made it outright irradiated, so humans could no longer inhabit it. You can't have a stated level the high tier should be at, and then give feats that exceed that level to certain characters, while also not showing enough feats that show the other characters at that level. That's what makes the scaling inconsistent, and not mentioning when characters are controlling their destruction adds to this. Because then we could say this attack has the potential to do this much damage, but said character is controlling it so that doesn't happen, which would better fit in the story. Since I used the God tier rank to make my previous point, I want to now look at the ranking system as a whole. The 150 ranking system should be a clear means of determining who is stronger than who, as the higher the number, the stronger you are. Yet it feels like the numbers of the ranking system don't always matter and are outright inaccurate. Andrea would be an example of her rank not mattering to how strong she is, as she was originally ranked 147. In Season 1, she and Rokash established that ranked members are stronger than Titans, and Season 2 confirms that Titan Generals are on the same level as lower ranked members. But Andrea then goes on to contend with a Gaki level threat in Goro, though he isn't actually on the tier of the Gaki in my opinion, as well as a stronger Titan General in the form of Lathe, and with Noragiri Jose, who is a captain, a position I feel is just beneath the Gaki. Andrea is able to contend with a myriad of characters while still only being ranked 147, hammering home the point of her rank not truly mattering to how strong she is, as she's always relative to the person she's fighting. And this would even apply to her fight against Rokash. Now, in terms of rank inaccuracy, I think Anton and Tevin are the perfect examples. In my opinion, they are not ranked accurately, and are put at ranks lower than what they deserve. Their ranks don't take into account the 8 months of training they have undergone, which is fine, but if that's the case, then what was used to determine how far ranked they should be was the contributions they provided during the Greenland War. with key points of that being Anton recovering the life box in their fight against Kaguya. Anton was made a war hero, likely for recovering the box, which in my opinion doesn't have too much to do with his rank, but the fight with Kaguya directly does. Kaguya was said by Andrea to be the former rank 102 in season 1. Anton and Tevin fight Kaguya before Shay shows up, with Anton fighting him just in base, being able to dodge almost all of his attacks, and Tevin with an unmastered hammerhide being said by Kaguya to be able to nullify his blows. This means that Anton without Kong and Tevin with his strongest hide are relative to Kaguya, with Tevin being more equal to him and Anton being above him, as later we see that Kong, while still poisoned and at 75%, can throw his staff and have it move faster than Kaguya can to touch the box, and Anton, while still in base, can capitalize on this opening. With this understanding, Anton and Tevin should not have been given the 118 and 127 ranks that they were given, but should be much closer to Kaguya's rank of 102. And in my opinion, Anton should be above it with a minimum of 100, and Tevin should outright be the new rank 102. Again, these ranks don't take into account the 8 months of training they have done, which made them stronger and likely put them closer to or at the pillar level. But Kaguya is the only form of metric we can use to determine how strong they are from a ranked standpoint, and this is the most natural way to determine a character's strength in relation to others, as more often than not, if you can contend with a person, you are as strong as that person. Though I just looked at rank inaccuracy, I think the pillars are ranked properly based on how their talents function, and how they would fare in a fight against one another. However, I think Rokash, who was said to be ranked 50 at his max, would actually do well against the likes of Eric and Tandor. And the fact that I think that's a possibility shows that the ranks aren't always a one-to-one on who is stronger than who, and isn't the best means of telling us this. Keeping with the ranked subject, I want to look at classified ranks and missing ranks. When I first saw Lewis and Azam during the season, my first thought was, why weren't they ranked? I could only assume it was due to their lack of participation in the Greenland War. But then we were told by Yukiko that Azam is a ride-along to Abijah, and furthers it by saying his job is to assist a god tier on missions. This outright makes Azam's position at the time something worthy of being ranked, as he's essentially doing the job of a royal, who are ranked members just under the god tier that actually assist them. So if Anton and Tevin can be ranked based on what they did in the Greenland War, then why can't Azam be ranked for assisting Abijah for a minimum of 2 months? Lewis not having a rank doesn't feel as bad, in my opinion, but giving him one would have added to his fight with Veal, as his rank could have been used as a metric to show how weak Veal had become and what level of Kimyo amongst the 150 he compares to with the amount of blood he has. We are also shown that Shay and Yukiko were given classified ranks, and this is outright pointless. Yukiko does nothing to even deserve a rank, and if what she did last season is why she has one, she wasn't even in control of what happened, as that was likely all Hisame's doing. She's also still learning how to use her talent, and hasn't achieved a baseline mastery and skill with it to put her on the 150 level. We also already know she isn't as strong as the other cubs, so why hide how strong she actually is? And if Brent was unsure of what rank to give her, why not simply put her at the bottom of the scale and make her 150, so that her growth is more digestible for the next time we see her, especially if she has an actual number. 150 also works for her being the weakest cub, as Andrea's rank is 147, and there's no way Yukiko is stronger than her. Shay having a classified rank makes even less sense than Yukiko, as we already had an implication of how strong he was from his fight against Veal last season, and Abijah confusing him for a third god key. With this, Shay's rank could have gone 2 routes, with him being ranked 12, since Brent doesn't want to give Vatic a hand, which could have added to Shay being like his grandfather, or Shay could have been given Jin's rank of 21, which puts him just outside of the god tier, which makes sense as like the royals he has less experience than them while having power that compares to them. This would also add to a feat we saw, as if Shay was ranked 21 and Jin was ranked 22, then Shay and Abijah being close in speed would have shown how close to the level of the GT they really were. When I look at Shay and Yukiko having classified ranks, I ask, why give a character a rank if it's not going to be used as a metric for how strong they are, or used to add to their character? There's genuinely no reason in verse or from a writing standpoint to hide the ranks they have. And if you would rather show how strong they are, then say so with a number, why put the ranks in the story to begin with? Now I want to look at Shay and some of his scaling, as it truly gives off the impression that he is far too strong. This comes from 2 sources, his base form in comparison to his state, and the purple flames he can now access with Zahara. Shay's base form with Ilios has skyrocketed, and it makes me feel as though the state aspect of his talent has become redundant. But let's look at this from the ground up. In season 2, Shay gained access to 100 100% of Ilios' chi, and with this he gained a higher version of Ilios' state, which we know as War State. When Shay fights Kaguya, he may be accessing more of his state to actually use the blue flames, but when he fights Vayal, he uses his entire state to fully combat him, with Ilios saying he and Vayal have the same level of chi, making the talents and their respective outputs equal. This is the most accurate depiction of Shay's strength when relating it to the level of the god tier, as he is using the full extent of his talent, with that being his state, to combat someone seen as above the god tier. This idea continues in season 3 when Shay fights Jose. Yes, he was holding back while in base, but when Jose uses all of his strength, so does Shay, and Andrea confirms this is a god tier level fight. This concept of Shay being a true god tier level individual while in his state gets entirely thrown out in episode 145, as Shay in base with no state amp is able to kill multiple god tier and Gaki level individuals, and that should not have been the case. This simple action makes Shay's base above the likes of every god tier and Gaki related character, which basically makes his state redundant, and if he can do that kind of damage in just his base, any use of his state seems like overkill, and makes it non-necessary. Since this is the case, when Shay fights Rajani, the use of his state during it should be unneeded, as his base form should already be on her level. What should have occurred instead was, the moment Shay began to form his large Tomas, he entered his state. That way the level of power he exudes matches the level of characters he is going to be damaging in a way that is far more accurate to what he had shown prior. You could also say the training Shay has undergone allows him to access even more of his state without needing to enter it, and if that's the case, it should have been mentioned somewhere during the season. Now, Shay's acquisition of flames that can burn chi itself is one of the most contentious things that occurred during the season, because it means that no matter what, Shay can defeat anyone he faces. He is essentially able to depower someone while keeping all of the strength he has, putting him at a huge advantage over them, if losing the chi they have doesn't outright kill them. Now, it's only right that I mention the 2 restrictions Brent has for the purple flames.
Shay's purple fire kills chi, so once you're made of chi, he can kill you. However, it has a nerf to it. It uses all of Zahara's chi, so he can't like infinitely use purple fire, otherwise he would be aka broken. There's a limited, but it can literally kill chi. Like, it uses chi as its oxygen, it's what sustains the fire. It has to burn chi, it can't burn on its own. So even this picture with Shay here, it's burning his chi.
Brent seems to direct what the purple flames can harm to beings made of chi, and this would relate directly to Sentinels since they are Kimyos who have fused with their talents. But the very concept of flames that can only burn chi would realistically apply to any Kimyo, as chi flows from the soul and through the body, and Ilios' own statement of possessing the power to slay talents really backs this idea. Brent also says the purple flames use all of Zahara's chi, which isn't bad and actually makes sense, as her talent and therefore her chi is supplying the power needed to change Ilios' property, and considering the magnitude of what she's doing, it's reasonable as to why all of her chi would be consumed, and makes the purple flame technique like Sun through Moon, which uses all of Ilios' chi. However, there is still an issue in this, as after Shay used Sun through Moon, he still had access to enough of Ilios' chi to make a Tomas and change his flames to blue when anticipating a fight with the god tier. This means that even after using Sun through Moon, Shay still has access to enough of Ilios' chi to continue fighting with it, and this should not be the case. A technique as grand as Sun through Moon, that's stated to use all of one's power, should leave the user without a means of fighting with it for some time, and this should be the case for Shay's use of the purple flames as well. But if the idea that Zahara has chi relative to Ilios is true, then Shay can use the purple flame technique for quite some time, or more than once, which voids Brent's own statement. To fix this and keep Shay on a more proper power scale, when he uses Sun through Moon, the purple flames, or abilities on that scale, he should not be able to use the chi they come from for quite some time. This means that Zahara's boost and Ilios' chi would be out of commission for a while, but this is not an issue, as Shay still has access to Zahara's blade, Vinter, and the chi of his body, and we have 2 fights to prove that without Ilios, Shay will be just fine. Shay is the main character, so him being strong makes sense. However, he already feels overtuned and too strong for the series he's in, so there needs to be ways of making him feel like he still fits within the confines of the story from a scaling standpoint that doesn't just involve making the opposition and people he faces stronger. Now I want to slightly step away from Kimyos and look more towards humans. Humans are very interesting and uninteresting in the world of Ordeal. They make up more of the global population in the verse, yet they have the least relevancy in the story. And in my opinion, Brent uses the Titan tech that was introduced in season 1 to keep them relevant, especially from a scaling standpoint. However, there is a big problem with this, as humans by nature are far weaker than the Kimyos we are actually following in the series, which more often than not makes them irrelevant. An example of this is Brandon. With his G3 suit, Brandon can stand against Titans with ease and Titan generals with more difficulty, which we see in seasons 1 and 2. However, in season 3, Brandon is put against human pirates who seemingly have no Kimyo aid, while also having Tevin and Lewis to help him. But I guarantee if they weren't there to help Brandon, his forces could have sustained more casualties, but he himself with his G3 suit would be able to replicate the stopping power Tevin was shown to put out in season 2 against Ryu, or even what we see him do on a base level in this season with minimal hide use against the pirates. However, if a Kimyo on Tevin's actual full-scale caliber was present while he and Lewis weren't, Brandon and his men would likely die failing their mission, because they have no means of dealing with someone that strong. Another example is Commander Henley. He and his men are useful in season 2 due to the caliber of Kimyos they are facing, which were standard Titans. Yet in season 3, he and the rest of his men are an afterthought when the fight with Jose and Lath begins, due to where they actually were when the fight started, and Andreas saying the God tier's conflict is not for them to meddle with, meaning they have no capacity to aid in this caliber of conflict. This idea basically gets turned on its head when we see Gary use a gun that can penetrate Roberto's rock armor, as well as the potential possibility that the humans during Kofi and Sonya's fight had bullets that worked that way as well. I'll focus more on Gary here since he exemplifies the point I want to make. To be clear, Gary already had story relevance due to him being blamed for the bombing, and how he would participate in hunting for the people who wronged him, which is why they are at Abel's mansion. So Gary, and by proxy Trinidad's technology, did not need to be made more relevant by him shooting Roberto. Looking at the situation from a scaling perspective, Roberto shouldn't have even been hit by something like that, as his Gaki status should put his reaction speeds far above even a Titan tech enhanced firearm. The bullet also shouldn't have been able to damage him, as the rock armor technique is hardening his body with the very weight of his chi. And since his chi is so high, the chi that's coated around the bullet Gary fired would have to be comparable to that of the God tier, which doesn't feel possible unless they have somebody donating those levels of chi to them. Something like this makes me feel like Brent is trying to keep humans relevant by ensuring they can always aid using the technology they have. But that doesn't make the most sense when used on the higher tier characters of the verse, as they should be on a scale far above what technology can produce. The cutoff for Titan related tech should be at the Titan general level, as that makes the most sense and feels the most consistent, and after that humans should no longer be able to aid in battle, as they can no longer keep up with the Kimyos who are fighting. A slightly more natural way you could allow humans to be on the higher end scale of things is giving some of them high tier talent weapons. We've seen what the likes of Noriyuri can do in the hands of a weak Kimyo as well as a strong Kimyo, so why not dive more into the extended part of the power system and use that as a way to have even more rare talent weapons be introduced, but given to qualified humans. For example, imagine if someone like Private Khalifa became a member of the Greyhounds and was given a G3 suit, putting her on the level of Titan generals, but Brandon was given a talent weapon like that of Excalibur, which could be comparable to that of Zahara and can elevate the power of even a human, putting them on the mid to lower end of the pillar tier. Keeping technology in focus, I like the idea of it helping boost humans like with Brandon and aiding Kimyo control like with Tandor, but it doesn't have a real place amongst the characters that are on the God tier level like with Sonya. Her Titan tech arrows offer her no real advantage that her talent itself couldn't provide. Brent himself said that God tier level Kimyos fight smart, and that the Titan tech arrows conserve chi for prolonged fights while delivering similar levels of devastation. I agree that the arrows have the potential to conserve chi, however she doesn't have an infinite number of them to make that an overall advantage, especially since Kimyos on her level should be able to fight for multiple days, which means at some point she will run out of those arrows and have to rely on her chi, and if her opponent is someone who has more chi than she does, what she was able to conserve will hardly matter. The arrows themselves do no meaningful damage to Konos or Kirito, and it's because they are on a level where such technology is meaningless to them. So to say they deliver similar levels of devastation is outright false. Sonya is the perfect example of why technology at the higher levels has no place there, as they cannot replicate the usefulness of a high tier Kimyo's own talent. you would be better off giving characters like Sonya a talent weapon like Bjorn had, so at the very least they aren't relying solely on their own chi and have access to something that can actually be scaled properly to the damage that's needed. To end off this section, I want to go over a couple more scaling issues. The speed scaling of Ordeal is not good, and it's because we hardly have an actual speed tier to put the characters in. For example, we know Kevin is light speed as stated during the season, but we also know he should be multiple times faster than that due to him likely flying to the edge of the solar system to stop the stars that were falling into mutual orbit and coming back to Earth in only a month's time. Someone like Jin should also be light speed due to how his talent functions with its relation to traveling forward in time, yet it's not fully clear because there's no mention of how fast he's actually moving by any character. Azam is another haste user, but he has no actual speed comparison, meaning we know he's likely faster than what he was in season 1 and 2, but we don't know by how much, nor how fast he actually is when he's moving. Brent said he was now faster than Rokash, but we don't even know how definitively fast Rokash was while using his full state, so a statement like that hardly matters. And even if it was put in the story, would not tell us how fast either character is. One thing Brent did in relation to speed during the season was have a character say the word fast. He did this to show that the character who said that word is slower than whoever they are fighting, at least in that moment, which he does with Azam and Lewis. This type of comment isn't bad, but I do think the art and action lines can speak for themselves in these moments. But what really matters here is that we have no clue how fast any of these characters are moving. And this especially matters to a character like Veal, who is weaker in this fight. But since we don't know by how much, we don't know how much slower he is in comparison to his peak. The one time Brent tried to scale the speed of something during the season, the number felt off. And that would be when he said Tomas was moving at 100 meters per second. That number is just far too slow for the speeds Shay, Laith, and Jose should be able to react and move at. All Brent has to do to fix these speed related issues is say that god tier level Kimyos are always light speed, and so is the trajectory of their attacks, with pillar tier characters ranging from that speed at the high end to about half of that at the lower end. And the exception of either of these would be when a character is weakened in whatever manner, which results in them moving or reacting slower than they normally would. Now, whether people know it or not, there's an underlying issue with how Brent uses healing and regeneration within the series. The only real baseline we know of when it comes to the increased capacity of healing for Kimyos would be Andrea's ability to heal from the bullet wound she got against Vince, that healed in about a week's time. And depending on the severity of the wound, it could take weeks or months to heal properly for the average human. So when we see a character like Azam, who has a talent related to increasing the speed at which his body functions, not being able to heal even faster than what Andrea showed, there's cause for concern. This problem is taken further when Azam's right arm is damaged and is implied to not have the potential to be healed afterward, which makes no sense since Azam in season 1 stated he had broken ribs but continued fighting, and is perfectly fine months later. And keep in mind, that type of injury can lead to lots of internal damage on a similar caliber to what happened to his arm. Why does a character like Roberto have the capacity to heal his eye after it is shot, or Jirohime, who can completely regrow new fingers after they are cut off, yet Azam can't heal his stab wounds faster than the average Kimyo or be allowed to keep his arm? I understand higher healing ability being somewhat talent specific, but you can still show basic Kimyo healing can come into play, especially with a talent type that is known for increased speed. The plot of season 3 is one of, if not the biggest issue the season had, and this is because the overall plot that is introduced doesn't finish, and the subplots that exist get rushed. Episode 114 introduces us to the Armageddon plan, where members of the 150 are tasked with targeting every enemy outpost, weapons cache, and troop reserve that is related to Thanatos, with the goal being to destroy these assets until Thanatos surfaces. This will eventually culminate in the final step of Armageddon, which is to use the prophecy that speaks of Thanatos' ruin at the hands of his brothers, meaning Kevin Morales, Vatic Adelmar, and Shay Hart will make contact with Thanatos in an attempt to face him uninterrupted, leading to his defeat. This is the plot we are given and are supposed to be following as the season went on. However, that does not occur. In fact, there are only 2 missions we see that directly relate to this plan, with that being Shay and Andrea's mission related to the Yamanote line, and Lewis, Tevin, and Brandon's mission related to the oil rigs off the coast of Venezuela. The reason I feel these missions relate to the plot more is due to how the characters involved are taking the fight to Thanatos and his related forces, whereas Azam and Yukiko's mission is related to rescue rescuing and securing the civilians, as opposed to actively seeking out where Titans are located and bringing the fight to them. This would apply to Kofi and Sonya's mission as well, since he is guarding world leaders. Shay's fight with Rajani, while technically fitting in the parameters that would align it with the Armageddon plan, feels more related to the plot introduced with Shay and Gary, where they will hunt the corrupted political figures responsible for the bombing. I'm hoping that it's understood that most of what we actually see doesn't fully align with the initial plot that is introduced, and actually ends up becoming their own subplots. It's as if the entire plot of the season was halted, and this is basically confirmed when Nico in episode 148 says they should proceed with Plan Armageddon, which means that at some point the plot of the season stops from a reader standpoint and from an inverse standpoint. Another way to know this occurred is the fact Kevin, Vatic, and Shay never make contact with Thanatos to fulfill the prophecy, meaning the plot never moved forward in a way that allowed that interaction to take place. And the aftermath surrounding that interaction was supposed to be how the season ended, as it would conclude the plot that was introduced properly. Now, I think it's important to look at when the initial plot is paused, and in my opinion, this occurs after Lewis's death within the range of episodes 144 and 146. The reason I say this is because Gary, the Greyhounds, and the God Tier technically take the fight to someone associated with Thanatos, that being Abel. However, Thanatos himself shows up, making the end aspect of the plot occur too soon. Shay then kills everyone present, with his action being undone, resulting in Thanatos fleeing, and then a whole month going by with no notes of Code attacking any of Thanatos' forces. Essentially, something is done to push the plot forward, then it's taken back, effectively making it as if no progression was even made. This is not all though, as Lewis's death, Shay's interaction with Jesus, and episode 146 are all things that subtly change the plot's focus and make it about Shay's progression into Ronin. With that being stated, I want to look at the plot structures of Ordeal's seasons, and understand why the third season has the worst one. In season 1, we are given a revenge plot where the Cubs wish to avenge Leo's death by killing Rokash. Season 1 also introduces the Titans and subtly changes the plot to focus on them as the season goes forward. However, the Titans are directly used as a way to segue back into the revenge plot, as the Cubs initially set out to help protect Trinidad from the invading Titans, but end up running into Cass, Jonelli, and Rokash. Season 2 brings us a plot related to the Titans again that has the cast in a different country due to the large amount of Titan activity in it. The plot is then extended as we find out the reason the Titan activity is so high and why the ball was attacked is because of the life and death boxes. This makes these items and the protection of them the plot for the rest of the season. Season 2 also has a B plot that occurs in Trinidad in regards to the documentation of the country's Kimyo population. If season 1 has a plot that shifts into another that leads back into its original, and season 2 has a plot that is given more depth than it initially had while also having a major subplot, then season 3 has a plot that shifts into another that is more of a subplot in nature while also having other subplots sprinkled throughout. What makes season 3's plot structure the worst of the trio is the fact that the initial plot doesn't finish before we shift into the new one. The new one has less longevity than it actually should have, and every other subplot that exists is rushed or forgotten. I've already explained how the Armageddon plan was halted, but now I want to focus on Shay's progression into Ronin, as it is the new plot we focus on. As stated before, the true start of this occurs right after Lewis's death, as we see Shay mourn by himself for 2 days, and isn't present at his funeral. This is a big change in his character, as he is now choosing solitude as opposed to it being ordered like it was for his training. The rage of Lewis's death culminates in Shay killing all present without care, as he only seeks to get rid of Thanatos, which then leads to his talk with the living God, who teaches him the lesson of grace and choosing death as a last resort. Shay's solitude continues with it now being total separation from the Cubs, and he puts the lesson he was just taught into action immediately when facing Rajani, as he initially wants her to turn herself in and not kill her himself. And even when he does land a fatal blow, he still tries to grant her salvation by trying to convince her to not be consumed by her talent. We then fast forward to episode 161, where Shay is in his subconscious speaking to Andrea. The contents of their conversation directly outline the type of path Shay will go down, which is a solitary one, and what he will become at the end of it, which is a better man and leader. If I'm not mistaken, this is the entirety of Shay's Ronin plot in the season. It is not a natural progression that occurs through the season's run, but something that completely changes the initial plot's focus. This is bad because it destabilizes the initial plot and doesn't do anything to segue us back into it, making it seem as though what is happening to Shay has no real connection to what was happening before. This is not to say that the events don't correlate in any way, but more so to say in the grand scheme of things, what Shay was doing before Lewis died and what he was doing after Lewis died have no full plot connection, as what occurred before is hardly relevant relevant to what happens after. This is why it would make more sense for what happens to Shay to have been a subplot that occurred over the entire season, as then we could better see how his actions and the actions of others change him from being stoic to more outwardly wrathful. But the way it is written, Shay is stoic, then showcases his sadness and rage, then goes right back to being stoic. This also makes it more justifiable for the two plots to not have much connection like in season 2, as Shay is not an integral part of the Armageddon plan until the very end, so he does not need to participate in it until that point. So him doing things like being with the Pillars, freeing Gary, and facing Rajani would show his separation from the plot itself, and could have better led to actions that affected his character, which would still lead to Lewis's death and his interaction with Jesus. I would also like to say that within Shay's Ronin plot, it feels more like a checklist of what Shay needs to have to be considered Ronin, which would be the Elder's Mantle, Zahara, and the loss of his arm. And at the end of it, we are given a direct blueprint on how Shay's character will progress, instead of it being naturally woven into the writing and something we see Shay figure out himself. It genuinely feels like Shay's character through this plot is being forced into something he hasn't been properly made to fit into. I hope I have properly illustrated what Shay's Ronin plot did to the overall plot of the season, as well as its structure, but now I want to focus on the final aspect of said structure, with that being the other subplots. The two subplots that are introduced in episode 114 right before the Armageddon plan is discussed revolve around Gary and Ian's situations. Looking at Gary first, he was blamed for the bombing that took place in season 2, but we find out he is able to be freed due to the evidence Minister Richard provides code. Gary's subplot then revolves around hunting those who were actually responsible for the bombing and becoming Trinidad's new law. His presence at Abel's mansion is a direct result of this, as he seeks Abel's surrender, but is fully prepared to raid Abel's mansion as well. One thing then happens that doesn't really make sense within the subplot, then another that completely disrupts it. Gary chooses to shoot Roberto instead of Amari, which makes no sense as Amari is one of the people he is hunting. Thanatos then shows up, and soon after, Shay kills all present, effectively cutting off Gary's subplot, as we never return to Gary trying to hunt down the people that betrayed him, with Shay essentially doing part of that job instead. But that wouldn't be bad if we got to see Gary trying to re-establish Trinidad's government, but now under martial law. But again, we never return to Gary, making his subplot effectively forgotten about. Now looking at Ian, his action of using the life serum in season 2 caused the people who funded the protection of the life serum to feel what now flowed through Ian's veins belonged to them, and thus he was placed in code protective custody because he is a great ally to them, and they sought to hasten legal proceedings and ensure he is freed of his own cognizance. This sets up a subplot of Ian being in legal trouble and potentially having a trial of some sort, yet Ian being in legal trouble is not dove into at all, and any relevance this plotline could have gets fast-tracked when Junie frees Ian in episode 144. This subplot could have been used as a way to take a deeper look into the grander political aspects of the series, especially considering the private mentions freeing Ian may cause Code's allies to feel slighted, and those allies are likely foreign governments. It would have made sense for Ian to be put on trial, to see if he would be imprisoned at Patmos for his actions, or released to one of Code's allies due to them funding the life serum's protection. And this is where we could have had a now free Gary make an appearance at the trial, not only vouching for Ian's actions, but also saying that if he is to be released to one of Code's allies, it should be to the country the serum was used in, as well as where Ian himself is from, with that of course being Trinidad. The potential use of Gary and Ian's subplots were clear, but didn't get the use they deserved. Now I want to look at the mole plot, as this is another plotline that was rushed, but also improperly set up within the season. Season 2 is when we are introduced to the concept of Code having a mole, specifically in episode 67 when Aldrich says there's potentially someone within Code leaking information. This idea is then reinforced through May and Sabito's flashback, where in episode 73, May asks Sabito who he thinks leaked the information about her and her talent, with them being attacked and Vale's appearance proving May's existence was leaked. A plan was then enacted and shown to us in episode 111 that confirmed the existence of a mole within Code. Season 2 set up the concept of a mole and then continued to reinforce it. However, Season 3 does not do that. At no point during the season's run are we ever concerned about what the mole is doing or has done, because at no point until the very end are their actions even revealed. The season does not take any sort of minor focus to further establish how the mole has been aiding Baal or what Code has been doing to combat this issue. Episodes 148 and 150 are the only times within the season that the mole is addressed in any sort of fashion, and it is also the same time we find out who the mole actually was. But before that, we never see a mole make moves, which would add more validity to the mole's existence. The reveal of Hanjiro being the mole only makes sense for the partial breadcrumbs that existed in season 2, with Nico being the red herring. But this season does nothing to further establish why it would be him out of all of the code heads outside of his name being a potential giveaway. And we have no real understanding of why greed would be his motive. Shay's attack on the moon base adds to this plotline, since it's stated that Shay's target was the research facility on the dark side of the moon. But that begs the question of how did Shay know to attack there? Nothing within the story at any point would lead anyone outside of the code heads figuring out that the moon base has potential to be leaking information. So how is it that Shay, through some unknown means, can conclude that information himself? This subplot was established well, but season 3 fails to re-establish and finish it off in a proper and satisfying way. I want to end this section off by looking at our antagonist, as I feel he should have had a more looming presence within the plot. Thanatos with Abel as his vessel appears in 7 total episodes during the season, yet he really only feels like a threat in 2, which are episodes 116 and 139. And these are both episodes where he is actually making attempts to grow his own power. Thanatos growing his power is good, as it makes him a threat to the actual characters from a combat perspective. However, considering his plan is heavily focused on world domination and the eradication of humanity, we should have seen more of how he plans to take over the world from his own point of view. And this would coincide with Sonia's own statement about Thanatos' methods consisting of micro-tactics. And there are 3 areas I feel would have benefited from hearing the plan from Thanatos himself. And those would be the nuclear materials, taking the Pillar's souls, and destabilizing nations. Not only did Jose's mission involve transporting nuclear material, but Rajani's own family was connected to nuclear research. So it's clear Thanatos had a plan involving nukes. However, we don't actually know what that plan consisted of, and we can only guess that he wants to irradiate whole areas to take out where the humans live while also making those places uninhabitable for them. This would outright make the story better if it had been explained by Thanatos, and would add to Thanatos' intellect by way of him actually knowing how to use the technology of the current era to his advantage. We know why Thanatos wanted to meet the Pillars, as he felt they could add to his power, and that the soldier's chi he had taken before was not enough. You're probably wondering why I put something that was told to us by Thanatos in here, and that's because I feel part of his dialogue would make more sense had we seen him mention it earlier. For example, imagine if soon after Thanatos killed off the men we see in episode 116, he says that their chi was large yet not sufficient enough to bring him back to the level of chi he truly desires. Then Kaguya or a shrouded Hanjiro inform him of the Pillars, high-ranking Kimyos with chi close to but not equal to that of the god tier. This would make Thanatos' statement of wanting to meet them to feel the weight of their chi hit a lot harder, since we saw the premeditated aspect behind said interaction. Through Sonia, we are aware that Thanatos seeks to destabilize nations by taking out their leaders. This would put them in a state of panic, allowing Thanatos to reveal himself as a viable leader for them. Again, this would be a lot better if it came from Thanatos himself, as it would directly show his wide-scale thinking, which is a trait needed for the goal he has. Taking it even further, us being told which governments have more potential to be destabilized, or what nations the government officials Kofi and Sonia were protecting were actually from, allows us to see which ones have potential to back Thanatos in the future. Learning about Thanatos' plan is great, yet only hearing it from other characters takes away from his grandness as the villain. It makes it feel as though he is not the threat he is supposed to be. Thanatos is supposed to be a powerhouse considering he is one of the Great Four, but he should also be seen as a competent villain, so his presence in the story and its plots should highly reflect that. In regards to Mango's cons, we have lack of expanding on side characters. Despite the expansive relations between the main cast, some get more attention than others. This left quite a few side characters and a small group of the main cast feeling stagnant or forgotten throughout the season. Lack of expansion on these subcategories of talents. We have been introduced to quite a few categories of talents. Whether it be single or double type talents, there are quite a few that are in what can be considered a subcategory, such as ancient, living, cursed, angelic, and mythical. However, despite the many ancient or angelic angelic towns we have seen with the Great Seven, Veal, Ian, and others, those of the cursed and mythical categories have not seen much time on the screen, often only having brief showcases before their death or before being sidelined for a greater showcase by another character, not taking time to deliver on promised points and to extend on old topics. Brent has promised us many things for Season 3, such as the flashback of Veal and Sabito, a flashback showing the initial discovery of blood sacrifice, Kaguya's past, and a flash forward of Shay in the Eye of Time. Now, after the end of Season 3, we have gotten 2 panels of Shay with the Eye of Time in his possession, yet no usage and nothing else. He didn't even deliver the 50 episode length for the season, only getting 49 by the final airing. Inconsistent scaling. Throughout the season, we were given many fights that showed the upper echelon of power within the verse, with everyone being estimated or confirmed to be rank 50 and above. However, those fights, while visually appealing, failed to properly display these characters at their peaks. Even while shown at equal footing or being stated to have specific capabilities, none of what was displayed gave evidence to back the claims. Lewis actually got worse as the fight progressed, making multiple mistakes despite having a solid initial strategy. Grimbor was stated to be able to defeat Thanatos, yet did minimal damage to him, and the one piercing blow that he did land had no lasting impact. In regards to Nauni's cons, we have season length. The biggest issue with Season 3 is its length. For a season meant to be the final one before a massive time skip, it simply felt too short. The long hiatus before the season already raised expectations, and the multiple breaks during the season made the reading experience feel inconsistent compared to Season 2. Because the season was shorter, many scenes that could have been expanded on, character motivations, or clarified certain plot points were either rushed or completely cut. As a result, several storylines felt underdeveloped. The short season ends up being the root cause of many of the other issues that appear throughout the story. Lack of side character development. One of the most noticeable consequences of the short season was the lack of development for side characters. Before the season began, Brent indicated that Azam, Lewis, and Kofi would all play major roles. In practice, only Lewis was used effectively. Kofi was barely present throughout the season and ultimately had a somewhat underwhelming fight at the end. His death was not confirmed, so there is still potential for future development. But if a character is presented as one of the season's main figures, they should actually be utilized as such. His fight also lacked a clear conclusion, which made his arc feel incomplete, given how much he had been hyped previously. Lewis, on the other hand, was handled much better. His fight delivered emotional impact, and the setup for his death that had been established since Season 1 finally paid off. His death also had meaningful consequences for the overarching story. While there were still minor issues, such as suddenly revealing that he had been married after his death, his character arc was far more satisfying than most others this season. Azam unfortunately felt underutilized. In Season 2, he didn't get much time to shine, but that season at least built anticipation for his future development. Season 3 should have been the moment where we explored how the events of Season 2 shaped him. Instead, we receive only limited insight into his character. He has a solid fight, but it ultimately has less impact on the larger story. After that moment, he becomes largely irrelevant for the rest of the season. This is especially disappointing because the upcoming time skip could significantly change his character. Without fully understanding who he is now, that future transformation may feel less impactful. Other side characters also suffered from a lack of attention. Andrea had very little to do, Ian felt like an afterthought, and Brandon was mostly relegated to the background. It is understandable that not every character can receive extensive development, but it often felt like Shay dominated the spotlight while other important characters received minimal focus. While Shay is the main character, the supporting cast is too important to the story to feel this sidelined. Inconsistent power scaling. Another issue this season struggled with was inconsistent power scaling. Perfectly precise scaling isn't necessary in every story, but when contradictions become obvious, they can disrupt immersion. Kofi is presented as one of the strongest characters in the series, supposedly just behind Kevin and Vatic. However, his feats in Season 3 did not reflect that level of power. This becomes even more noticeable when Vatic appears at the end of the fight and unleashes an attack far more impressive than anything Kofi displayed. Earlier seasons established extremely high power ceilings. Kevin was shown pulling apart 2 neutron stars, and Shay even cut the moon in half this season. When feats on that scale exist, seeing a supposed top-tier character perform far below that level creates confusion about the hierarchy of power. There are also moments where unnecessary details complicate the scaling. For example, Brett mentions that the Earth's core would be too hot for Okeanos to handle. However, Okeanos is supposed to be comparable to his brother Ilios, who literally possesses sun-based powers. If the brothers have fought before without Ilios overwhelming him, then suggesting that the Earth's core's temperature is too much for Okeanos feels inconsistent, especially when we have already seen characters replicate or surpass solar-level feats. Moments like that create contradictions that weren't really necessary for the story and end up muddying the the established power system, over-promising and under-delivering. The final issue that ties into the previous ones. Expectations were set higher than what the season ultimately delivered. When creators build anticipation for specific character arcs or story developments, audiences naturally expect those elements to play significant roles. In this case, several of the promises made before the season did not fully materialize. Being slightly more cautious about setting anticipation could help avoid disappointment in future seasons. Throughout the second half of the video, I have discussed the unfavorable aspects of the season, but also tried to offer alternative routes for those narrative errors. Some of those areas could be seen as missed opportunities in the writing, and so I wanted to use this section as a way to look more directly at some of the other missed opportunities that have occurred in the season. At the start of episode 121, Andrea makes two very interesting comments regarding Jose and Leith. She first questions if Veal is cloning his followers due to Jose and Leith having the same aura as Vincent Sota. And she also states that they may have the memories of other Titan generals as well. I thought this concept would be expanded on at some point in the season, yet it never was, and became a one-off statement that had no merit. In my opinion, this concept would have worked very well for a Tevin-related fight, as the character Ryu Godskin is the initial turning point for Tevin's later change in morals. So to have him face a new Kimyo that has a similar mindset to that of such an important character to Tevin would fit very thematically. And if we take the actual memory aspect into account, we could see Tevin fighting a character who knew how his rhino and lion hides worked, which would force him to use a new hide from Blacksmith's Forge, as Ryu when he fought Tevin didn't know that existed, so neither would the new Kimyo who has his memories. Ephialtes is also a good candidate for this type of concept, as he has now been bested by both Azam and Abijah, so it would be interesting to see a new Kimyo who has the memories of Ephialtes, which includes how to best combat Azam and Abijah's speed. It would be even more interesting if this Kimyo was a haste user themselves, as that would make them a very fast individual who knows how to deal with other fast individuals. Though it was a missed opportunity in season 3, both of these examples and the entire concept as a whole has the potential to reappear in later seasons. It is a good way to have characters face someone from their past while also introducing new talents and Kimyos at the same time. It also allows you to show off something new for the characters, whether that be a mentality shift, a new power related asset, or even something as simple as better teamwork and combo moves. Though I will also state that if done too many times, it will start to get repetitive, so it has to be used very wisely. Brent going into season 3 mentioned things that never came to fruition, such as Kofi being the star of the season focusing on Kevin Morales, as well as the potential flashbacks he announced, and the last one is what I'd like to focus on. Out of the 4 flashbacks that were intended to be in season 3, I only think 2 of them would have had a proper place in it. The first is Sabito giving Veal his scar. The fight surrounding that incident has 6 mentions throughout seasons 1 and 2, and in order they are: Leo telling Rokash a friend of his is the only one to survive an encounter with him, Veal telling Sabito the wound he gave him will be repaid, Sabito telling Mei that Veal fears him so he won't fight him again, Veal telling Shay that Sabito attempted to cut him in half yet failed, Veal telling Bjorn that he is not a fan of the ice element, and Bjorn saying that Veal hasn't been wounded since his Sabito incident. The fact that things related to their fight are mentioned so much shows how significant it is within the verse, so to have it finally shown within season 3 would have made a lot of sense. The question then becomes, where would it have gone within the season? And in my opinion, episode 147 is the perfect spot, and this is for 2 reasons. The first is that Lewis had just given Veal a permanent injury, so having Veal relate that recent incident to what happened to him in the past makes perfect sense. The second reason is that Thanatos just yelled at Veal for failing to kill all of the hearts, so it would make sense for us to then be shown Veal's first ever failed attempt to kill a heart. This second reason is why it would have made more sense for us to see Veal and Sabito fight as opposed to us seeing Veal face the first Codeheads 200 years ago. The second flashback I think would have fit within season 3 is the one related to Kaguya's past. Now, Kaguya's past is probably one of the most mysterious things about the series, so to show even a little bit of it would go a long way. You may wonder what exactly about Kaguya's past would be shown, but it doesn't really matter, as it can be written to connect to whatever it needs to. The question now becomes, where would it go? And there's only 2 places it can go, with each place potentially showing us something different. The first is in episode 136, after Kaguya looks at Yukiko. This moment could have been used to look at a younger Kaguya who could somewhat relate to how Yukiko feels in that situation, or used to further show how Kaguya felt about Sabito marrying an outsider in the form of Mei, and this flashback sequence would be similar similar to what we saw from Lewis in that same episode, or what we see in relation to Vayal in episode 140. The second place a flashback could appear would actually be at the end of the season, and this is because you could use an aspect of Kaguya's past to help further establish why he would want to speak to Shay. Though not a flashback, another thing that Brent announced before the season was the Cubs starting teams, which explicitly says that Anton is on a secret assignment. I could have missed something, but at no point during the season is it ever shown or implied that Anton is doing something secret. I'm not fully sure what this secret assignment would have been in relation to, but it feels like a missed chance to show off the other loner member of the Cubs by himself. Depending on the setting, this mission could have been a way to expand on the world building aspect of the series by placing Anton in a new environment created by Brent. I did think this mission would be used as a way to give Anton something new in relation to his talent, specifically the flying cloud that is synonymous with the Sun Wukong myth. Brent has a notable tendency to skip the story ahead by months and not use that time to dive into anything notable. This isn't technically bad, but it's a little odd that nothing of note happens in certain instances. A month is said to go by in episode 146, and 3 months is said to have passed since Shay fought Rajani. Gaps of time like this can be used to show events in increments, like in season 2, where we saw the progress the cast, especially Shay, was making during the month leading up to the eclipse. It would have been very nice to see Vayal send forces in an attempt to take out Elon Jr. during the month skip, since it would be a very vulnerable time. Especially since Dr. Hanzo tells Vayal directly unless he takes out the bearer of the Ash of the Father's talent, he will be stuck with the pain he has. However, at the time I'm making the script, Brent has shown a teaser of Elon Jr. as well as other Hemlock members. So while this was a missed opportunity during season 3, we may see a very similar concept appear in a flashback format in season 4. In another section, I mentioned how I enjoyed Jesus' appearance within the story. However, here is where I want to talk about the issues that come with placing a figure such as him in the story and how I think it could have been done to avoid reader backlash. Jesus was used in 2 ways in episode 145. The first is as a character reflection for Shay, and the second is inherently as a Deus Ex Machina. Deus Ex Machina, by definition, is a person or thing that appears or is introduced suddenly and unexpectedly, and provides a contrived solution to an apparently insoluble difficulty. To put it simply, it is a device used when authors write themselves into a corner, providing them a way out of the problem they wrote themselves into, though it is almost always controversial or unliked. And this is how Jesus was used in episode 145. The contents of 145 has Shay killing all people present, effectively stopping the story in its tracks as the protagonist and antagonist's lives were snuffed. And the story can't continue without either, so to undo the narrative corner Brent wrote himself into, he has Jesus undo Shay's action, allowing the story to go on. Now, whether you think Brent did this intentionally or not doesn't really matter, as it makes using God in a story look bad because now people assume that at any point actions can be undone within the series with no consequences. And if the goal is to place Christianity in a story that doesn't feel like it's being done in a jarring way, you have effectively done the exact opposite of that. In my opinion, Christ does not need to undo Shay's action, as he does not need to be placed in this part of the story. If the goal of this aspect of the season is to look more at Shay's character and see how he is changing, would it not make more sense for Shay to do the same thing he did in episode 145 by attacking Thanatos, but then have Thanatos ward off the attack with his newfound power? This would then see Shay's attack being deflected, but still causing massive casualties in wherever you wanted to say the attack went to. This would have allowed Thanatos to show off his strength in a small manner, as well as lead people of the verse to see Shay as a threat, since his attack is what killed others. And after displaying such strength, Thanatos can still vanish with his forces, and the rest of the season can play out in a similar manner. However, now we would have Jesus speaking to Shay at the end of the season while he's in REM sleep, imparting these same lessons. This directly removes the Deus Ex Machina factor we have, while also making the lessons Christ imparts hit a lot harder, since we would have seen even more of how Shay's failure to kill Thanatos, as well as his accidental death of others, would have affected him. I say all this to say, it would have been a lot better if Jesus was used to look at Shay's character and lead him down a proper path, and not also used as a means of undoing a narrative error. The entire review so far, I have taken a look at the things I enjoyed and the things I disliked. But within those dislikes, I have offered alternative routes the story could have been taken instead of just offering basic criticism. Now, instead of doing a normal outro, I want to take this time to establish how I think the series can be improved by Brent. We have gotten a few teasers in preparation for season 4, and these are good, but what needs to stop is false hype, which is what I would call what Brent did leading up to season 3. I have mentioned them in the latter half of the review, but Brent mentioned things in different outlets about what season 3 would or could consist of, which built up hype and expectations for the season. What makes this a problem is that hardly anything he said actually came to fruition within the season. If you're going to build up hype by giving us teaser information on some of these season's contents, make sure the information is definitive. There's no need to tell us something if it's not guaranteed to be in the season, because when you do that, you set a precedence for what to expect, and when that doesn't occur, the disappointment factor has the potential to supersede the enjoyment factor of what we actually got. A good example of what I'm talking about is the season 3 promo that features Shay and Norigiri. You wouldn't be entirely wrong if you chalked what I'm about to say up to a bad interpretation on my part, but the image implies Shay would interact with Norigiri in some way, or even a fight between him and Andrea. However, the location the image is placed in made it seem as though that interaction would take place there. I'm not even the only person who thought this, as the Instagram user Benji makes a similar connection based on the promo image and the teaser panel image we see only 2 posts later. Again, you can chalk this up to us reading too much into the image, but setting is very indicative of where something may occur. In this presumed setting of the interaction ended up being blatantly false, and it didn't really have to be that way. If you disagree with that being a good example of the point I'm making, Brent literally told us what flashbacks we could see, as well as saying the season would focus on Kevin, yet neither of those things made it into the season. So I simply ask, why build hype or tell your fanbase things if you're not going to deliver? Near season 3's end, Brent informed a specific channel on the Discord of how long his break will be and somewhat of what he plans to do during it. He says his break can't be longer than 10 months, and he implies he plans to take half of that time to work on Ordeal and the other half to work on another series. And if this is still true, I highly dislike it. Of course, the overall amount of time Brent has is out of his hands, but how he chooses to use that time is. And dedicating half of it to a new series when there are plenty of things to look at within the main series feels like a partial waste. I'm not really excited for anything new Brent has to put out because Ordeal still has so many holes that need to be filled in. So why not use the entirety of your time to firmly establish the writing? Brent has said he has every character's arc written, but how well does that translate to the actual writing when fully drawn out? Brent has said he wants to take his time with the series and not rush things, and if that's the case, why not properly use all of the time you are being given? It's pretty clear that Brent has major things about the series planned out, such as the things that happen to Shay, but it's also just as clear it's not always established prior how those things will occur. For example, we know Shay had to lose his arm, but it feels like how it was done was more impromptu than initially thought out before the season started. Another example would be Thanatos. I am a firm believer that Brent only gave Thanatos Malhazar's sword Stone Will because of what I said about it in an episode review. As cool as it is to think I had an impact on an aspect of the story, it still feels bittersweet because it kinda happened out of the blue. No real narrative setup and an unknown metric as to how much more of a threat him having that weapon makes him. You could apply this same logic to the Merlin Stone as well. I and everyone who reads the story simply want more of its contents to feel properly planned out and not as though things are being made up as they go, especially since there is time to bridge the grander parts of the story to the smaller, more minute aspects of it. A very personal gripe I have is how Brent uses talent descriptions. I want it to be clear that my issue is when no talent description is given at all for no real reason, or a talent description is given for no real reason. Looking at examples, Lath's talent description was shown to us in episode 120, and this is more often than not how Brent will use them, showing them at the start of a fight to set a precedent on how that character's abilities work, and this is exactly how it was used for Sonya and Kofi later on. In the following episode, the only thing we get about Jose's talent is its name, which is fine as we get a sort of grand reveal for how strong he actually is later on, and this is where his talent description should have been given, because Brent did a similar thing with Rokash in season 1, showing off his talent then giving us a description of it when he reveals his full strength. To not give Jose's talent description at all makes no sense considering he's the initial major threat of the season, and Shay's way of showing how much he grew in power. Kronos is also another example, a major threat to Kofi, and at no point is his talent description given. Another thing to add on to missing talent descriptions is the concept of a character adding a new talent type. This is seen when Andrea speaks to Lath, saying that he has a kinesis type even though we see his talent is said to have a creation. This can cause a form of confusion, as it makes readers assume the characters giving this information are incorrect. But if they are correct, why not simply add that information to the description itself? Having characters explain how their talents work, or how they think another character's talent works, is cool and fits properly within how the story is set up, but we've already established the concept of descriptions, so why are we skipping out on some of its details or the entire thing as a whole? Even Bjorn was given a description at his funeral, which almost made it even more impactful, as it could be seen as putting the talent to rest with him as well. Reed would be an example of the second aspect of my gripe. He, as well as I's aspect of his talent, are given to us in episode 141, but then they don't do anything. I assumed Reed would get even a minor showcase since his description was given, but he doesn't shoot Roberto, Ariel, or Thanatos. So what was the point of showing how his talent works if he wasn't going to get a chance to use it? Talent descriptions are such a fitting concept within the series, with Rokash basically pioneering the style of how they are shown. And they can be used in varying ways, such as us only getting the details of Vayal's talent due to it now being public knowledge. But why are we simultaneously using and not using the concept when we should instead be going all in with it? I know I have sections that discuss the problems with Ordeal's characters, but I also want to say it plainly here. Shay took up too much space this season, and I and many others would like to see less of him. Yes, he is the main character. Yes, he is cool, but we also want the characters we like more than Shay to get the respect they deserve. And that can't happen if Shay is the center of attention, so much so that he overshadows the other characters and makes it as if they don't need to be in the story to begin with. In season 1, Shay was interesting, but the narrative allowed Andrea and Rokash to be just as interesting. And this is what we need more of. More characters actually showing how relevant they are to the series' overarching plot, and more characters showing the cool abilities they have. Shay is the star, but this series does not thrive because of him at all. It thrives because we have moral foils like Tevin and Vayal. It thrives because we have mentor figures like Leo and Bjorn. It thrives because we have interesting dynamics among characters within the established groups. Shay will forever be the grand hero of the story, but don't forget about the other characters that were established with and after him, because if they don't hold any significance, why put them in the story in the first place? Earlier in the video, I talked about what Brent could do to lighten his load during a season's run, but what I suggested was intended to be perceived as a solo solution. But in all honesty, Brent could use some form of aid, whether that be with the art, with the writing, or with both. Brent is an artist before he is a writer, so his artistic ability will always supersede his writing ability, so writing help is not a bad idea. An individual who can help ensure the plot stays consistent and that needed and relevant information makes its way in would go a long way. Of course, I would love to do this myself, but there are probably people out there far more qualified to do so than I am. And as long as they know the story and the true direction Brent wants to take it, it doesn't matter who the aid could come from. A drawing assistant would do Brent wonders, and I would like to see Shadow Ronin in such a role, as his art style is probably one of the closest I've seen to Brent, but he may not need someone to help fully draw out whole panels, so even someone who can help him with line work or background rendering could go a long way, as it's just another thing he doesn't have to do himself. If Brent does attempt to get some form of aid, I'd say it's best to start the process sooner rather than later. Now is my time to end the video, and I'd like to say, Ordeal is one of my favorite sources of fiction, and it has such potential to be great, but that can't happen if no improvements are made. Everything I've mentioned up until this point, the good and the bad, helps lay out a foundation for such improvement, and a lot of what I said can apply to many characters and many situations. This video isn't just meant to criticize and look at season 3, but also to help look at the series as a whole and ensure the quality of a season never drops in such a way moving forward. However, I am not the only voice though. I'm simply a larger voice amongst a crowd, and this video can be used to ensure the masses have a voice as well, so I urge everyone who made it to this point of the video to leave a comment. Let everyone know how you feel about the season and its contents. Do you agree with the points I made, or do you disagree? Is there anything I missed that you feel should have been brought up? Are you excited for season 4, and what are you hoping to see in it? Let's allow this video to be a consistent point of reference for Brent moving forward. For now, this video is done, but I'll see y'all in the next one.